From the top rope and the Great American Bash, I bid you all good evening, morning, afternoon, wherever you may be in this great land of ours or around the world. Welcome to the $55 million studio on the Pro Wrestle Machine. Let's get into this issue. Through the use of the Pro Wrestle Machine. February 8, 1999 Wrestling Observer Newsletter. Giant Baba passes away. By Observer staff. The death of any major pro wrestling figure makes one reflect upon the past. But the death of Shohei Baba will likely have repercussions far more telling about the future, and in ways that nobody at this point can predict. More than the death of a wrestling superstar or a legendary promoter, of which he was both and a lot more, his death spells the end of the major chapter in Japanese wrestling history, of which he was one of the two main participants. And his death leaves in question the future of the old style of wrestling, with lengthy main events, clean winners and losers, finishing moves that work against the top stars, of which his company was the lone holdover, and the beginning of a new chapter in the Japanese wrestling world. What it will turn into and how it will get there is far more difficult to examine than what it was and will probably never be again. Baba, one of a very small handful of wrestlers, realistically one of only 3 men in the history of the business who achieved the status of being national figures for several generations far bigger than the wrestling business itself, passed away at 4:04 p.m. on January 31st due to cancer in the bowels region. Baba belongs with only Antonio Inoki and El Santo when it comes to people that everyone in the culture, from grandmothers to young children, vividly knew, like Elvis, possibly the Beatles and the Stones. His longevity, being a national star for nearly 4 decades, made him bigger than Rikidozen, the most famous of the sumos or even baseball legends like Sadaharu Oh and Shigeo Nagashima, even if his peak of popularity never reached the levels of Hulk Hogan and he never sold merchandise like Steve Austin. It's a category of name recognition that Michael Jordan and Magic Johnson may not have even reached in American sports, and that Hogan, Charles Barkley, Strangler Lewis, Frank Gotch and Ric Flair never came close to and really couldn't even touch. His political ties at getting things done boggled the mind. Those close to Japan marveled at his ability to keep talent out of legal problems despite their best lapses of judgment. The most famous story came a few years back when Steve Williams was caught at the Narita airport with a small amount of marijuana. While that would seem insignificant here, in Japan things aren't as tolerant. Paul McCartney, who one would think could find someone with political stroke somewhere being who he was at the time, was kept out of Japan for decades for the same offense in Japan. Being caught at the airport would mandate prison time. Baba struck a deal. Williams spent no time in prison, and after not being allowed back in the country for 1 year, Williams was able to return as if nothing had ever happened. But this very public figure tried to lead a very quiet, secretive life, and he carried that philosophy to his death. Even his famous marriage was for years a secret. Those in the company and reporters remember Motoko Baba around for more than 20 years as his wife and partner in the wrestling business, and easily the most powerful woman ever in the industry, but it wasn't until July 7, 1982 that Baba would publicly admit to it. Baba's longevity when it comes to power and shaping the history of the industry can probably only be matched by Inoki, and not for longevity, but for power and shaping history by possibly only Vince McMahon, and maybe Toots Mondt or Sam Mushnick. In Japan, for whatever cultural reason there is, the word cancer is simply not spoken, which explains the sketchy details over the past 2 months of Baba's health when it became clear he was in bad shape. Due to the sketchiness, rumors spread that it was cancer and that it was far more serious than was being let on. Baba had previous health problems that had been kept quiet, and he never missed time in the ring for them. His 3,764 consecutive matches without one miss, which realistically is more than 4,100 because his American matches weren't included in that figure, from 1960 through suffering a neck injury in 1984 will never be broken, which is why when he missed 2 matches in early December without an injury, rumors quickly spread that his health problems must be serious. He came back for what turned out to be his final match at Budokan Hall, doing the same match he's done for years, teaming with Rusher Kimura and Mitsuo Momota to beat Haruka Eigen and Masafuchi and Tsuyoshi Kikuchi, largely to quell rumors about his health, which also turned out to be the final time he appeared before the public. His death was eerily similar to a man who parts of his career were similar to in life, and who he was the final promoter to ever book, Andre the Giant. Andre also ended his career 6 years ago at the Tag Team Tournament Finals at Budokan Hall doing the same mid-card comedy match, and died several weeks later while never really laying on to anyone just how close to the end he was. Baba had been diagnosed with the cancer, and underwent a first operation on his bowels that was kept quiet. His failure to take his usual December vacation and canceling his proposed trip to the WWF pay-per-view show in Vancouver was explained by saying he had suffered a bad cold. He had been released from the hospital in late December and given a positive prognosis that the first operation had removed the cancer. It was said publicly he would be missing the January tour because he was trying to recover from a bad cold and many of the arenas on the tour didn't have heating, which was not a good sign because it seemed like a rather flimsy story. On January 8, when undergoing a routine checkup, it was found that cancer was still there, and he was rushed that day into a second operation on his bowels, which was announced publicly 3 days later, although the cause still was kept sketchy. No press or wrestlers were allowed at his recent birthday party at the Shinjuku Area Hospital in Tokyo on January 23, which was another bad sign, when he turned 61. Far from the usual major celebration it had become in recent years, those allowed to see him were limited to his two closest friends in the company, the ring announcer and the head referee, and his wife Motoka, a widely known controversial figure inside the Japanese wrestling industry who it is generally believed will fade away from the scene with his death. Even Mitsuharu Misawa, who visited Baba in the hospital in December, was given the impression his condition wasn't that serious. When he went again in January to visit him, he wasn't allowed to see him but was never told until after his death it was cancer or that his condition was life-threatening. Although some rumors popped out of the hospital to those inside the wrestling industry, it wasn't until 27 hours later, a press conference carried live on NTV at 7 p.m. on February 1 where Mitsuo Momota Jr., Jumbo Tsuruta and Misawa made the announcement that Baba had passed away, that anyone in the public knew. Misawa himself only got the news 2 hours earlier that he was now, by virtue of inheritance, one of the 4 major kings of the industry. All the sports newspapers quickly restructured their front pages. The Super Bowl and the opening of the Japanese baseball training camps were suddenly not all that important. Most television and radio newscasts carried Baba's death as the lead story. The biggest news station, NHK, similar to PBS in the US but far more powerful, which by tradition never carries any pro wrestling news, had it as the third lead story. TV Asahi, the rival network to Baba's NTV, devoted 20 minutes of its 30-minute newscast to clips and interviews with major sports and entertainment figures on Baba. NTV, the network he was synonymous with, was rushing a special onto the air. A private funeral limited to a few friends, family and the All Japan wrestlers and staff was scheduled for February 2, where he was cremated, with a more public ceremony scheduled for later in the week, but the overwhelming press demand caused Motoka to waver and virtually every television station in the country carried it live. Baba, on his birthday 8 days before his death, was brought a tape of the Misawa vs. Toshiaki Kawada Triple Crown title change match held the night before his last birthday, which it was said put a big smile on his face, and turned out to be the final wrestling match he would see, and he died being the last promoter left presenting that style of wrestling. Some say that Baba was the wealthiest man ever in the wrestling industry, although he was very private on his personal finances as well. Those closest to him believe the only man in the industry who would be wealthier is McMahon. Others say perhaps Hogan. Baba, who in the early days of the All Japan Wrestling promotion had his share of financial troubles, parlayed the millions he made promoting and wrestling into mainly land and real estate investments in both Hawaii and Japan starting in the early 60s and gaining a fortune through numerous real estate boom periods, in addition to stock market investments that made him a multimillionaire, although it wasn't always that way. Nevertheless, he was a conservative, both fiscally, which caused his promotion to lose ground in the changing wrestling world over the past few years, and in the way he lived. This has somewhat made it forgotten historically that as a promoter, he was actually one of the greatest innovators in history, particularly developing concepts that stood the test of time. His life was getting on the bus, going to the next city, sitting behind the gimmick table with his trusty cigar and quietly giving orders to various messengers that would go to various wrestlers, presenting a wrestling show, and getting back on the bus to do it again. It was the biggest mom and pop wrestling business that ever existed. Like the recently departed Mushnick, he used the biggest name talent and some of the biggest egos in the business, but even though it went against the grain of his headliner style in other promotions, they all knew that finishes were not negotiable. He never seemed in recent years to even worry if the house was big or small because he had more money than he could ever spend. He treated people in the manner he grew up in the business, which at one point made him the promoter everyone wanted to work for because of his reputation for honesty and because he paid more to top talent than any other promoter in the world. Guaranteed, until recent years, but in recent years, by not adapting to the changes in the industry, that reputation had changed. After his death, the leading celebrities and sports stars in the country told stories about growing up seeing this larger-than-life, almost priest-like cultural figure. And his young boys, who grew up to be the best workers the business would produce in the modern era, started out as teenagers washing his back, tying and untying his wrestling boots, running messages, carrying his bags and slowly paying their dues so to speak, to where, as the theory goes, when they get a top position, They'll realize how hard they've worked to earn it and they'll respect it. He wanted to be on that bus, because he could have lived his life in France on the Riviera, noted Terry Funk, who worked with him in the formation of All Japan Pro Wrestling and booked for the company for the next 15 years and largely made his career on the reputation gained during that time period. He loved doing it that much. He had no need for anything else. Baba promoted wrestling against the grain of the common wisdom, and up until the last 2 or 3 years, was ultra successful at it. His weakening business in recent years wasn't necessarily a message that his concept of wrestling has outlived its time, but the reality of failing to continually produce new superstars which would eventually kill any concept of wrestling. The wisdom of promoting wrestling is to give the audience the product it wants to see, changing constantly to keep up with the changing of modern tastes. Baba's philosophy was different. To him, his role as a promoter was to educate the public and his wrestlers to appreciate what he believed to be good wrestling, combining hard work and psychology. His ideas are pro wrestling should be hard, athletic, respectable work sans gimmickry and foolishness. In the entire history of the All Japan office there were only 2 gimmick matches, both in the early years, a Texas death match between Baba and Fritz von Erich, and a judo jacket match between Anton Giesink and Don Leo Jonathan. While his own mid-card match for the past decade was almost complete comedy with no semblance of being athletics, at least on the top of the card, and his shows were always based on the top of the card, the matches were treated as serious sport with drama building to the finish. His idea was to present what his vision of good wrestling is, and teach the public to accept it, and like Mushnick, he was almost always successful doing so, and maintained a weird credibility of his product because of it. But it's a lot harder task both to promote, because it requires a very physically demanding style to make up for elimination of so many gimmick-oriented shortcuts and angles, and one, without the easy gimmicks and all but the most basic of angles, harder for a wrestler to get overdoing and greatly limits the wrestlers who can be successful at the top because if you can't work the style, you can't maintain the position. Baba's style could only be successful when presented with the top talent to be found in the world, and fortunately for Baba, more often than not over his days as a promoter, he had enough of it to make it work. And because of it, his style produced more legendary matches than any other, even over the past few years. But people forget that Baba's style wasn't always dated, and for years in many aspects of wrestling, All Japan was the promotional leader in the industry in booking, presentation, product quality and treatment of the talent. When it came to booking tournaments, no company has ever done so as meticulously and seriously, and thus All Japan tournaments have stood the test of time at the box office, and many finals are clearly remembered by a national audience for more than a decade. People think of entrance music as something Gorgeous George did and was then forgotten until Michael Hayes showed up playing Freebird 25 years later, and that Vince McMahon took credit for it years after that. In actuality, it was Baba and All Japan in the early 70s who popularized entrance music for the big stars, and merchandising entrance music albums and tapes which hit the pop charts a generation before WWF, The Music, Volume 1. All Japan was also the promotion that pioneered merchandising t-shirts and souvenirs also in the early 70s, long before McMahon Jr. saw wrestling operating on that level and New Japan Show and brought the concept to the United States. And while All Japan didn't create what would be called hardcore wrestling, it popularized it on a major league stage in the mid-70s for the Funk Brothers battles against the Sheik and Abdullah the Butcher. While Antonio Inoki is generally credited with the mixed martial arts gimmick, it was actually Baba who did it first, signing judo legend Giesink of recent Olympic scandal fame and booking him against the top wrestling talent of the day. Baba was also the first promoter to regularly feature a foreigner, Destroyer, as a regular top babyface in the early 70s, and did what would be considered a modern angle, except it was done 26 years ago, when Destroyer had become the first foreigner to wrestle full-time in Japan and became a crossover television star in the top-rated primetime comedy program on Japanese television, and while filming a live episode, was attacked on stage by Abdullah, starting a heated program. He was the first to book foreigners on the Japanese side in feuds, first Destroyer and later the Funks, breaking the traditional Japanese versus Gaijin mentality when it came to the main events. He created the concept of the acrobatic masked man aimed directly for a children's demographic with Mill mascaras, that New Japan took to the next level years later with the first Tiger Mask. And recognizing in 1988 that the second incarnation of the Universal Wrestling Federation had become the hottest wrestling company in the world and his business was starting to have to play catch-up, Baba totally overhauled his booking philosophy. He'd spent 16 years of having frequent and predictable double count-out finishes in the big matches to protect egos and unbeatable reputations for the top stars, and by 1990 had gone to an all-clean finish format, eliminating DQs and cores. In his mind, and he repeated it to those close to him, this was his most successful change of all. It led to the hottest period of business in company history, a concept Terry Funk gave to Paul Heyman, not so much clean finishes as going to winners and losers rather than easy out DQs as a way to differentiate his own product from the pack a few years later. But the question that must be asked is, where does it go from here? Baba had long since laid the foundation that when the inevitable occurred, the new president of the company would be Misawa, who had already taken over as booker in a power play late last year and has been the company's top star for nearly this entire decade. Misawa, 36, is now placed in the unenviable position of trying to continue a legacy both inside and outside the ring that few in wrestling history have even come close to approaching. Shohei Baba was born on January 23, 1938 in Sanyo, a small city near Niigata, in central Japan. He was the ace of the Sanyo high-pitching staff, known for having an overpowering fastball, and gained enough local notoriety that he was scouted by the Yomiuri Tokyo Giants, the Nationals Major League Baseball powerhouse. He was signed at the age of 16 while early in his junior year of high school, causing him to drop out of school in November 1954 to train for the Japanese big leagues. His major league career was the proverbial cup of coffee, more notable because he was no doubt the tallest man ever up to that point to play Major League Baseball in Japan. While legend may have him as the 50s version of the unit, the reality was he played only 3 games, while still a teenager late in the 1957 season, finishing with an 0-1 record, and was sent back down to the minors for more seasoning. One of his teammates was Shigeo Nagashima, the current Giants manager and easily the most popular baseball player in the history of the country, who was all over media this week talking about his brief experiences taking batting practice against Baba in a baseball uniform. The Giants dropped his contract after the 1959 season and he signed with the Tayo Whales for the 1960 season, but as legend has it, before the season started, he slipped and fell in the bathtub, destroyed nerves in his arm, and his baseball career was history. There was interest in making him a television or movie star, being that in those days, there simply were few if any Japanese, certainly none that had any name recognition, and that kind of physical presence, that were 6'9", to play the role of a monster villain. However, Baba shunned the offers, not wanting to play those type of roles, and instead wound up being sent in the direction of Mitsuhiro Momota Sr. Rikidozan, by this time a national hero, and owner of the Japanese Wrestling Association. Rikidozan was already established as a national legend for beating huge foreigners, particularly Americans, in a new sport theater that had become a huge hit on Japanese television called Puroresu. Rikidozan was starting to get to the age where he realized to keep his business strong, he'd have to start grooming a successor to his throne. In April of 1960, Baba entered Rikidozan's dojo as one of his 2 hot prospects for future superstardom, the other being a high school track star of huge renown that was of Japanese descent who had been living in Brazil named Kanji Inoki. The 2 trained together under Rikidozan, and made their debuts on September 30, 1960 at the old Daido-ku Gymnasium in Tokyo, where Baba beat Yanadoro Tanaka, and Inoki, called Antonio Inoki to give him a more mysterious air, lost to Korean star Kentaro Oki. Over the next few months they wrestled on several occasions, always with Baba winning, and in fact, Baba never lost a match to Inoki before Baba went sent to the United States to gain experience to be brought back as a headliner a few years later. A funny thing happened. Unlike other Japanese wrestlers, who usually worked as part of salt-throwing tag teams and never got over past a certain level, although some Hawaiians billed as Japanese such as Duke Kyomika, Mr. Moto, and later the likes of Toru Tanaka and Kinji Shibuya were significant regional stars, Baba was the biggest true Japanese star ever in the United States almost from the moment he got off the plane in July 1961. Training under Fred Atkins, a surly old shooter from Toronto, and being booked around the country by the Great Togo, and being billed as the largest Japanese native in the world, billed at 7'3" and more than 300 pounds, at the time he was probably about 260 pounds. He became an immediate freak attraction because of his size and a heel because American wrestling fans were still being sold on World War II angles, following the lines of other freak attractions in wrestling such as Primo Carnera, who facially greatly resembles today's Giant Silva, and all the French and Swedish angels that had an eerie presence and were big draws in their day but generally couldn't work a lick. He was the Andre the Giant of the early 60s, and unlike his freak predecessors, Baba at this point in his life was an agile athlete who could wrestle a little, although clearly his success was more due to his unique size and structure. Togo got him into every major territory as a headliner, and he was one of the biggest draws during another rebuilding period of wrestling interest. While big money was earned, Togo apparently got the lion's share. American wrestlers of the era such as frequent opponent Freddie Blassie were horrified watching Togo violently beat up Baba in the dressing room after matches with his wooden shoes as a Japanese custom of learning respect. Baba himself recalled getting $25 a night while headlining the biggest arenas, and surviving on 1 meal a day of bread sandwiches, and he never looked at his run as an American superstar as a happy time. However, His fame in the US in his first year already outshined that of Rikitozen, who was never an American star outside of Hawaii and Southern California, and became a perpetual thorn in the side of rival Inoki, who was never able to achieve anywhere close to the same level of stardom. Under the name Baba the Giant, he became a big attraction in the Northeast, including many Hill vs. Hill main events in 1962 against NWA World Champion Buddy Rogers throughout the area. He generally worked as the heel either on top or underneath Rogers against the top faces of the day such as Bruno Sammartino, Johnny Valentine, Bearcat Wright, Argentina Rocca, and Edward Carpentier. Sammartino's first ever loss at Madison Square Garden, and first loss in a singles match to anyone but in world title matches challenging Rogers, on a countout, came on November 13, 1961 to Baba as the semifinal to a Rogers vs. Rocca match that drew 20,253 fans and an amazing for that time gate of $62,000. His feud with the Destroyer over the WWA World title sold out the Olympic Auditorium in Los Angeles. Togo sent Baba back to Japan in March 1963 for the annual World League tournament amidst great fanfare, wrestling to a 45-minute draw with Killer Kowalski in his first match back in Japan on March 24, 1963 at Sumo Hall, causing Rikitozen to remark to many that the successor has been found. Probably the best example of his American stardom came at the end of his U.S. run in February 1964. During that month he faced, and since he was soon to be leaving the country, put over Lou Thesz for the NWA World title in both Detroit and Cincinnati, Sammartino for the WWF World title in Madison Square Garden before 14,764 fans, and finished the month challenging Blassie for the WWA World title at the Olympic Auditorium, which is remembered as being a poor match which drew a poor house. Few, if any, wrestlers in American history probably ever challenged for all three at the time major world titles during the same month. By this point in time he was earning substantial money in the US when the JWA, in danger of closing shop, wanted him back. Business being what it was, the JWA could make no promises he'd be able to earn what he'd been making in the US. Togo told him to stay, but he didn't listen, ending their business relationship, and returned home. He literally saved the business. After the death of Rikitozen on December 8, 1963, a gangland-style nightclub stabbing murder, investigations into the death of the national idol revealed a heavy mob influence in the pro wrestling business. The image of the sport darkened and most major arenas refused to even allow the shows in. Baba is best remembered by people who followed Japanese wrestling in the mid-60s as the perennial international heavyweight champion, whose quiet charisma and lack of any known scandalous ties, a reputation that stayed clean in wrestling over 4 decades, cleaned up the image of the profession, wearing the same belt Rikitozen made famous by beating Lou Thesz. Baba beat all the top foreign stars of the day such as Sammartino, Blassie, Fritz von Erich Thesz, Bobo Brazil, Gene Kiniski, Kowalski, Don Leo Jonathan, the Destroyer, Dick the Bruiser, the Crusher, Wilbur Snyder, and so many more, eventually bringing the business back to where his big matches starting in 1966 began to draw sellouts at the biggest arenas. His baseball stadium international title versus NWA World title challenge to Kiniski on August 14, 1967 at Osaka Baseball Stadium, which ended as a 90-minute draw, the longest title match ever in Japanese wrestling history, drew in excess of 25,000 fans, and was the match when looking back, Baba always considered the greatest match of his career. Earlier that year, on March 7, 1967, in a WWF title versus international title match, he had gone to a 60-minute draw with Sammartino at Sumo Hall. But his most amazing stat during that time period came on January 24, 1968 with the Japanese version of Raw vs. Nitro for the first time ever. A rival promotion, headed by Thesz, got a network special and billed a Thesz vs. Danny Hodge main event, a rare at the time meeting of top foreign scientific stars, billed as for Thesz' original world title belt that it was claimed was the same belt that dated back to Frank Gotch and Strangler Lewis. JWA countered with its own live broadcast of a Baba title defense against Crusher. The publicity at the time for the primetime war was enormous, with the Baba Crusher match drawing a 48 rating while the Thesz vs. Hodge match drew a 26 rating, without question the largest combined audience for pro wrestling probably at any time in history in the world up to that point. The first challenge to the JWA of Tokyo Pro Wrestling, formed by Toyo Nobori, the former president of JWA, booted out over squandering company money on booze, broads and ponies, with help from Hisashi Shinma, using Inoki as the top star. The group debuted on October 12, 1966, and lasted less than 1 year, with Inoki returning to the fold. The period from 1967 to 71 is best remembered for the Baba and Inoki tag team, and was one of the legendary periods for the Japanese wrestling industry with nightly sellouts and huge television ratings. As international tag team champions, Baba and Inoki first captured the titles on October 31, 1967 in Osaka from Bill Watts and Tarzan Tyler, and over the years beat such teams as Kinniski and Johnny Valentine, Fritz, and Waldevon Eric Crusher, and Bruiser, the Funks, Snyder and Hodge and Sammartino and Ray Stevens. Baba was never what would be called a great worker, but he was often a surprising one. Most of his matches wouldn't look good by today's standards, but there were nights he could be a remarkable worker. A prime example was July 30, 1970, when he faced Dory in an NWA title versus international title match. It was during a blistering heat wave and there was no air conditioning in the old Osaka Furitsu gym. With the TV lights, the mat was literally almost on fire. The finish was to be a double count-out, but teasing the idea of going to a 60-minute draw. But the heat had made the mat so hot that anything more than momentary contact with it to an exposed body part would sear the skin. So with rest holds on the mat not even a possibility, Dory and Baba went 55 minutes to their double count-out, drenched in sweat, with Baba making quite a statement for himself as an athlete and for his conditioning with his performance. It would be that way for nearly another 25 years. For the most part, Baba's tag matches were carried by his partners, usually Tsuruta, who was, when motivated, one of the great workers of all time. His singles matches usually weren't much, but he'd pull off a miracle from time to time. Every now and then, with the spotlight on him, he'd rise to the occasion. It used to be one of those deals where every year, there would be a Baba match, usually in the tag team tournament, where he'd face the younger guys and put on a performance that nobody could believe he was capable of, and this went on as late as 1995 when he was 57 years old and formed his tag team with Hansen in his final few matches as a serious big show headliner. NTV, which broadcasts All Japan to this day, and has covered pro wrestling nearly every week since Rikitosen put it on the map in Japan in the 50s, carried a show and had Baba under a big guarantee as a network star. In 1969, a fledgling network called NET, later renamed TV Asahi, which grew into one of Japan's 4 major networks, went to the JWA and Inoki to acquire broadcast rights for its own wrestling show. The result was 2 hours of prime time, one on Friday and the other on Monday on 2 different networks, usually with a Baba singles match on NTV as the main event and an Inoki match on NET as its main event, and if there was a tag match with both of them, it would alternate. Since Inoki's matches were usually better than Baba's, this created a lot of internal controversy as to who the top star in the company should be, with each network lobbying strongly for their man, causing lots of internal disharmony. The boom in front of the scenes led to chaos behind the scenes. The owners, Junzo Hasegawa, Yoshino Sato, and Kakichi Endo, paid almost no attention to American wrestling and were lagging when it came to promoting new foreign stars or understanding the ability of the talent to bring in. In addition, they had the same vices as Toyo Nobori, and somehow the company was running out of money. Terry Funk recalled that near the end, when his brother Dory was world champion and worked for the old company for a huge guarantee, that they were literally paying him off in crumpled up $20s. Baba and Inoki both wanted to start their own company, but when the word reached the office, Inoki was fired, but the office protected Baba as the top star. Inoki's maneuverings were hardly hidden from the office, as Terry Funk recalled one time when his brother had his first NWA title defense against Inoki, that the office warned both Dory and Terry, who was stationed at ringside, to be alert for a double cross and attempted title theft, which never materialized. But Baba didn't last much longer, and set the seeds in motion for his own big move. Inoki had started New Japan several months earlier in 1972, but in October, Baba, having just left the JWA, and with the help of Dory Funk Sr. and more importantly, with NTV siding with its top star as opposed to JWA and signing a contract paying Baba $15,000 per week for television rights, which sounds like nothing today but was a lot in those days, ran his first tour of All Japan Pro Wrestling using such top foreign names as Sammartino, Terry Funk, Blassie, and Dutch Savage, starting a relationship with the Funk family which lasted for more than 15 years with Terry, and 25 with Dory Jr. Baba chose Dory Sr. to be his American business partner to book foreign talent, a job that after SR's death the next year fell into the hands of his sons, largely on the advice of Masao Koma, one of his wrestlers who had been working the Amarillo territory. Fritz von Erich, whose Dallas territory ran bigger markets and was a much bigger money circuit at the time, fought hard to get the position, including making an under-the-table payoff. He went to St. Louis for meetings with Mushnick to get the all-important NWA recognition, which gave him access to the top American talent, and just as importantly, blocked New Japan from said talent. This started, on the major scale, the more than 2-decade-long war between Baba and Inoki. The two couldn't have been more opposites. Baba was quiet, reserved, and considered generally as one of the most honest wrestling promoters in the world. Inoki was the opposite. Baba never had scandal attached to his name, and it was often said he'd make a strong political candidate. Inoki always had scandal attached to his name and ended up in political office. Baba made big money and kept it. Inoki made bigger money and squandered it. You never heard anyone complain about being shorted on pay from Baba, and in every situation always came off as the babyface. Those close to the situation recognized that Baba was always the bringer of the good news, and Motoko was the one who always delivered the bad news, thus kept Mr. Baba's reputation great with everyone. Deals were cut ahead of time and everyone knew the terms. You couldn't say that for Inoki. Baba ran a traditional company with traditional angles, while Inoki relied on creating gimmicks and created more elaborate work-shoot angles. Baba maintained control of his company while Inoki in later years became a figurehead. Each had periods where it looked like they had the other down for the count. Each came back, usually bigger and stronger than ever. Inoki ended up more famous. Baba ended up more respected. Baba favored old-style wrestling, but was devoid of most of the ethics, or lack thereof, that came with that territory. Inoki created a new style that came with the old-style ethics. And in the end both and the industry ended up far bigger because of it. Personally, there wasn't much to Baba's life besides the wrestling that was well known. There was his trademark cigar seemingly forever, although he gave it up about 5 years ago. He never drank, saying he didn't enjoy it when he was drunk. Besides, it would interfere with his always dignified rep. Well, there was this one time when he went to a nightclub in the mid-70s and got loaded, but you get the drift. He loved vacationing in Las Vegas. And like with his wrestling business, he loved repetition. He played only the craps tables, for hours on end, not worrying about the time. He always bet the same money, $50, no matter if he was winning or losing, on the same line time after time, hour after hour. When he was so tired he couldn't stand, he would ask for a chair, and since he was so tall, he could still see everything going on in the board. Despite having access to the top Americans, All Japan was not an immediate success, with one of the problems being a lack of babyface stars to face all the top Americans, as Baba was a one-man Japanese show, as New Japan always had a deeper roster of native talent. Baba went to work to solve this problem by bringing Destroyer in as a full-time regular on the face side. He signed a wrestler out of the 1972 Olympics named Tomomi Tsuruta, who was an incredible worker almost from his start in 1973 after training under Dory Jr. at Amarillo, and signing judo legend Gisink to also work as his tag partner on the face side. Gisink had tremendous national recognition because judo was introduced by Japan as an Olympic sport in the Tokyo Olympics in 1964, and Gisink beat the top Japanese heavyweights in their own game to win the first ever judo gold medal. The Gisink blueprint was followed successfully for another short run more than a decade later with a former sumo grand champion, Hiroshi Wajima. Neither were good wrestlers, and both were well past their athletic primes, but both had big enough names from legitimate sports to create an awareness of the company's wrestling product and were drawing cards for a few years on top before they faded away. With the two companies at war for the top spot, Baba and Inoki also had their personal rivalry in trying to convince fans who the top Japanese wrestler was. With the international title in the hands of Kentaro Oki in Korea, Baba created his own title called the Pacific Wrestling Federation title in early 1973, but believed to create a title to headline shows with and have it mean anything, the tournament would have to be loaded. Baba set up the PWF title tournament in February 1973, monumental in its time and maybe even more so today, with himself winning over the likes of Sammartino, Terry Funk, Abdullah, Destroyer, Snyder, Jonathan, Brazil and Pat O'Connor. It was probably the only tournament in history where every competitor involved would be considered as having Hall of Fame credentials. With Inoki's popularity on the rise, Baba, to again try and position himself as the man, purchased the NWA title for himself for a one-week period in 1974. He did so again in both 1979 and 1980, and also purchased the AWA title for a few months for both Tsuruta to give him credibility as an internationally recognized world champion, and later Stan Hansen in the 80s. Usually both groups would do their regular business, and then something big would happen, usually precipitated by New Japan, which would wake All Japan up into retaliation. Inoki gained tremendous notoriety for his mixed matches with Willem Ruska, another judo Olympic gold medalist. While Inoki is always credited with that gimmick, it was Baba who actually introduced it first, to take the lead, which saw All Japan turn the Funk's babyface to feud with Sheik and Butcher in the first of what today would be called a hardcore feud in Japanese mat history. The war was a huge political deal stateside. New Japan wanted NWA membership and access to the champion, as Inoki's NWF world title didn't have the credibility of the NWA champion that Baba could bring in for big shows. At nearly every NWA meeting, The major topic of discussion and arguments wound up being the situation in Japan. Baba and the Funks argued against letting New Japan in. New Japan had three powerful allies: Eddie Graham, Vince McMahon Sr., and Mike LaBelle. Finally, at the 1976 meeting with Graham voted in as president of the NWA, the proponents of dual membership got New Japan into the NWA, caused Inoki to no longer bill his NWF title as a world title, which opened the door for McMahon Sr., Graham and LaBelle to be able to send Inoki talent, which they had already been doing to varying degrees. Politically, that was theoretically going against an NWA member, but New Japan had big network television money behind it, and booking money meant more than the illegal and ignored restraint of trade pact the NWA was somewhat built on, which is why it was such a hot issue at the time. McMahon SR's top star and world champion, Sammartino, out of loyalty and his friendship to Baba, refused to work for New Japan, which led to bitter disagreements with Sr., and it wasn't until Bob Backlund got the WWF title that McMahon Sr. was able to send his world champion to work for New Japan. In 1973, Sammartino, seeing the huge Baba squirming to get out of his small car, in Japan, they didn't have big cars in those days because they didn't have big people, except for Baba and the heavy sumos, that would have needed them, gave Baba one of his old Cadillacs that he wasn't using as a gift. It cost Sammartino $3,000 to ship it to Japan, and Baba repaid him the money on the next tour. This past week, Sammartino remarked to the Japanese press that if Baba's business had during that period ever hit rock bottom, that he'd have gone to Japan and worked for him for free to help rebuild it, noting that he is the only promoter that he ever dealt with in his career that he would say that about. When Sammartino retired from wrestling the first time, he made a comeback more than 3 years later during the first WWF boom period. His final match was in All Japan on October 9, 1981, teaming with Baba, going to a double countout with Tiger Jeet Singh and Umanosuke Ueda. Even after New Japan got NWA membership, Baba was able to keep New Japan from getting dates on the NWA World Champion based on previous loyalty from that era's champion, Harley Race, who Baba had his best matches in the 70s against. One of the reasons Dusty Rhodes, at the time the NWA's biggest drawing card, never had a lengthy run as champion, aside from some of the traditional old-line promoters not wanting him as their representative, was because Rhodes had booking ties with Inoki and the pro-Baba political forces, and the old-line promoters combined to keep him from a lengthy reign. By the time the early Ric Flair as NWA champion era came around, the political structure had changed and NWA membership was no longer considered important to New Japan. The two companies worked together briefly in 1979, running a joint show which sold out Budokan Hall for the first time in years. Business was down throughout Japan in the wake of the Muhammad Ali vs. Inoki disaster in 1976, and NTV had to financially help back All Japan, although Baba paid the money back during the next boom period to regain control. Inoki and Baba teamed together for the first time in 8 years, beating Butcher and Tiger Jeet Singh. After the show, relations fell apart and the company started up the war. New Japan started the most bitter part of the war when it doubled Baba's longtime top-heel monster rival Butcher's money from $4,000 to $8,000 per week, unheard of money for a wrestler in those days, and he jumped. All Japan then did the same, and Baba basically promised Stan Hansen, New Japan's top foreign star and Inoki's biggest money rival, a lifetime deal, probably the only lifetime deal in the history of pro wrestling that wasn't signed on paper but was kept. But Ted DiBiase once noted that a handshake from Baba was more binding than any elaborate legal document signed with any other promoter, and he jumped. New Japan signed Dick Murdoch from Baba. Baba signed Singh and Ueda, New Japan's top heel tag team, from Inoki. The Hansen deal, finalized months earlier at a secret meeting in Hawaii between Hansen, the Funks and Baba, and kept virtually totally quiet, was the biggest and over the long haul, most important jump of them all. Hansen had just finished his New Japan tour, where he was the top foreign star and Inoki's main rival, teaming with Hogan in the tag team tournament. 2 days later he showed up for All Japan's finals, interfering in what became a legendary match where Bruiser Brody and Jimmy Snuka beat the Funks, had a post-match brawl after the fact with Baba, and became Baba's final singles rival. With the brief exception of a period when Brody's popularity peaked, Hansen gained the status as the most popular foreign star ever to work Japan, a status he retained until the last year or two. New Japan caught fire behind the Japanese versus Japanese main event feuding and the popularity of new stars like Tiger Mask and Hogan. All Japan wasn't far behind, with Terry Funk's first retirement, and the drawing power of the Miracle Power combination, Hansen and Brody. All Japan then pulled the big raid, leaving New Japan near dead as they raided most of Inoki's disgruntled crew in 1984, led by New Japan's hottest star, Riki Choshu. All Japan ruled the roost for a few years and came close to ending the war for good, but then Choshu and most of his crew jumped back. All Japan retaliated by bringing back Brody, who had jumped to New Japan just after Choshu came to All Japan, and Butcher, who Inoki had stopped booking because Inoki had scored his pin on Butcher, and believing he was past his prime, no longer wanted to pay him his huge contract. Most of the 80s went back and forth like that. Baba's business was getting strong in the late 80s, built around a hot program of Genichiro Tenryu going heel, basically taking the slot Choshu popularized a few years earlier, and forming a tag team called Revolution, first with Ashura Hara and later with Hansen and finally with Toshiaki Kawada, to feud with Tsuruta, and the return of Butcher and Brody. Baba, one of the last powerful members of the NWA, who continued to feature the champion prominently and cooperated with most of the top NWA promoters, was as the years went on, becoming more and more an island upon himself as the NWA began disintegrating in the face of the WWF's onslaught. His relations with Jim Crockett Jr., who was running the NWA, got strained when Crockett Jr. canceled several advertised tours of Ric Flair, which resulted in breaking the long All Japan/NWA World title legacy. In a lurch with several big shows built around Flair, Baba made the deal to bring back Brody, who had been out of Japan for nearly 1 year after walking out on New Japan prior to a tag team tournament. Brody, who became hotter than ever before on this run, died 1 year later being stabbed to death by Jose Gonzalez in a Puerto Rican dressing room. The final straw seemed for the NWA, and the long history of the NWA Championship in All Japan came after Turner had bought JCP. A deal was made, for both the NWA and All Japan, to recognize a World Six-Man Tag Championship team of Tenryu and the Road Warriors. The Road Warriors had become hot attractions for Baba and Crockett, and Tenryu was Baba's leading star, and this was a chance to make him the elusive American big name that Baba, but few of the other Japanese superstars ever achieved. A title defense was scheduled as the main event of a Clash of the Champions on February 15, 1989 in Cleveland, where they would defend against Junkyard Dog and Dick Murdoch and Michael Hayes. The NWA, soon to be known as WCW, set up an angle where Kevin Sullivan and his crew would lock a door, somehow keeping the challengers from getting to the ring, and his crew would take over the match. It seems tame today, even if the stupidity level, as if nobody could get bolt cutters to save an advertised title match, to Japanese fans, would still be just as high. This went way beyond a position Baba wanted to could explain to the press for his top star to be in. Baba left the NWA, and WCW made a deal with New Japan after Baba opened up doing business with WWF. WWF and All Japan ran a huge show at the Tokyo Dome on April 13, 1990, which also featured New Japan in a supporting role, but that relationship was doomed from the start because of the gigantic ego clash between Baba and McMahon, with Baba feeling insulted because he was advertising the Hulk Hogan title match on top, while WWF was switching its title to Ultimate Warrior before the show and failed to let Baba know about it ahead of time. But there were so many problems that after drawing 53,742 fans for the US-Japan Wrestling Summit, where Baba formed his tag team with Andre the Giant for the first time beating Demolition, the sides never worked again. As a side note, one of the prelim matches on that show, a 15-minute draw that was really nothing special as a match, pitted two of the top wrestlers over the next decade, Misawa, still as Tiger Mask, and Bret Hart. The main event was a lot bigger story. WWF only asked as a booking concession that Hogan and Warrior be protected, and since Warrior was facing a WWF wrestler, Ted DiBiase, who had major name value in Japan as he was formerly Hansen's regular tag partner in Japan, his match wasn't an issue. Terry Gordy, one of Baba's top single stars, was scheduled to put Hogan over, and refused, feeling that Japan was where he made his money and not where Hogan made his money. Hansen saved the show by taking Gordy's place literally the day before the card, and cleanly put Hogan over. By losing, in the Japanese fan mentality, Hansen, who was cheered slightly more than Hogan in the match, became the bigger star. The Japanese fans knew that since Japan was Hansen's territory and Hogan was no longer champion, that he should win, but also understood the American egos and credited Hansen with agreeing to do the wrong thing in order to save the show. Finally, after nearly 2 decades of trying, in 1991 at the Tokyo Dome, the NWA World Champion, Ric Flair, defended his title on a New Japan turf, and it was just as well for Baba by this time, since he brought the dusty finish to Japan with him for his famous match with Tatsumi Fujinami, something Baba had long since eliminated from his repertoire. During that same time period, what should have been a killer blow, but turned out to be a blessing in disguise, came when Tenryu, Hara, Great Kabuki and several others jumped for unheard of money at the time when billionaire Hachiro Tanaka formed the old and quickly doomed SWS promotion. This forced Baba, notoriously conservative about elevating top talent despite the success he had with Tsuruta, who was a top star from day one, to fill spots vacated and start pushing wrestlers like Kawada, Kenta Kobashi, Akira Taue and Tsuyoshi Kikuchi into main events, which led the company to its best box office period in its history. The biggest move, which set up the final boom period, was taking the mask off Tiger Mask, and giving Misawa the push as the new singles star by pinning Tsuruta in one of the most emotional matches in company history on June 8, 1990 at Budokan Hall before 14,800 fans to usher in the clean pinfall finish era. That show came a few hundred from a sellout, but the result of Misawa catching fire because of his win against Jumbo led to Budokan Hall becoming the hotbed for years of pro wrestling, verified in Baba's mind why his style of doing clean finishes, causing the end results to have meaning as being the best philosophy over the long haul. A string of sellouts in the building lasted for several years with the Triple Crown as the focal point, and the highest quality of title matches held perhaps anywhere in history as the lure. Beginning after Misawa's big win, All Japan sold out more than 250 consecutive shows in Tokyo over the next several years, routinely doing houses in the $1 million range 8 times per year at Budokan Hall. At the company's business peak, they would put tickets for the next Budokan show on sale at a live event, and completely sell out the next show. Even Tsuruta, still positioned as the #1 man in the promotion, contracting hepatitis in 1992 and basically finishing his career as a serious headliner coming off the best year of his career, couldn't stop the freight train of success and credibility Baba had brought to his newly created Triple Crown belt, which combined the old international belt that Rikidozan and Thez made famous in the 50s and that Baba owned in the 60s, the PWF belt that he had owned in the 70s as the company's top star, and the United National belt that Inoki had made famous in the late 60s on the early net broadcasts. For several years, during a down period for business worldwide, Baba was drawing the biggest houses, producing the best television and providing the best wrestling matches, at least involving men, anywhere in the world. Even though it peaked years earlier, Baba finally agreed to do a dome show on May 1, 1998, and it was the most successful show he would ever promote, drawing 58,300 fans featuring Kawada's first ever singles win to capture the Triple Crown from Misawa. But nothing lasts forever, and the formula, due to a lack of new talent to fit into the mix and the physical toll the style takes, got stale and a crew of banged up top stars, and the company has suffered over the past 2 years. The recent signing of Vader gave the company a shot in the arm, but it's clearly a stopgap measure. And now, without Baba, the question becomes, in this rapidly changing wrestling world of the fad of the week ruling the roost, what's next? Giant Baba. Career title history. Source: Wrestling Title History's 3rd edition. NWA World Heavyweight. Defeated Jack Briscoe on December 2, 1974, in Kagoshima. Lost to Jack Briscoe on December 9, 1974, in Tokyo. Defeated Harley Race on October 31, 1979, in Nagoya. Lost to Harley Race on November 7, 1979, in Amagasaki. Defeated Harley Race on September 4, 1980, in Saga. Lost to Harley Race on September 10, 1980, in Atsu. NWA International Heavyweight. Defeated Dick the Bruiser on November 24, 1965, in Osaka to win tournament. Title had been vacant since the death of Rikidozan on December 8, 1963. Lost to Bobo Brazil on June 25, 1968, in Nagoya. Defeated Bobo Brazil on June 27, 1968, in Tokyo. Lost to Gene Kiniski on December 3, 1970, in Osaka. Defeated Gene Kiniski on December 19, 1970, in Los Angeles. Vacated title when leaving JWA Promotion. Pacific Wrestling Federation Heavyweight. Defeated Bobo Brazil in tournament finals on February 27, 1973, to become the first champion. Lost to Toru Kamada on June 1, 1978, in Akita. Defeated Abdullah the Butcher on February 10, 1979, in Chicago. Lost to Harley Race on October 26, 1982, in Obihiro. Defeated Harley Race on February 11, 1983, in St. Louis. Lost to Stan Hansen on September 8, 1983, in Chiba. Defeated Stan Hansen on July 13, 1984, in Tokyo. Lost to Stan Hansen on July 30, 1985, in Fukuoka. NWA International Tag Team. Various matches and partners listed, spanning from November 5, 1966, to August 1, 1983, in locations including Fukushima, Osaka, Hiroshima, Sapporo, Seoul, Asahikawa, Koriyama, Matsuyama, Nagasaki, and Fukuoka. Asian Heavyweight. Defeated Kentaro Oki on October 29, 1977, in Kurioso, vacated title, All Asian Tag Team. Matches with Toyono Bori against various opponents, from May 29, 1964, to July 15, 1965, in locations including Sapporo, Shizuoka NWA World Tag Team, Michigan version. With Jumbo Tsuruta, defeated Randy Scott and John Bonello on June 28, 1980, in Detroit, Michigan. Promotion folded afterward. Major tournament victories. List of victories in various tournaments between May 13, 1966, and April 16, 1982-1978 Real World Tag League. With Jumbo Tsuruta, Drew Dory and Terry Funk in finals on December 15, 1978, won tournament by having the most points. 1980 Real World Tag League. With Jumbo Tsuruta, defeated Dory and Terry Funk in finals on December 11, 1980. Wrestling Observer Awards, as a promoter Best Promotion 1990, 1991, 1993. Best Weekly Television Show, 1989, 1990, 1991, 1992, 1993. Best Booker, 1989, 1990, 1991. Promoter of the Year, 1990, 1991, 1992, 1993, 1994. Whether one would consider the Mankind vs. Rock title change taped in an empty arena in Tucson on January 26th, and airing during halftime of the Super Bowl is a good match, or whatever it was supposed to be, which was more like an 18-minute-long movie fight scene, it was a rousing success from a rating standpoint, continuing for a promotion that has caught unbelievable fire. The 20-minute-long counter-programming segment on USA Network drew a 6.59 rating and 9.3 share, making it the single most watched WWF wrestling match from start to finish ever on cable. Some brief overrun segments have done better, and the highest-rated WWF television show on USA in 11 years. Perhaps even more amazing, considering there was almost no pub in its direction as opposed to massive pub regarding halftime heat and the title change, is that the Sunday Night Heat show, which went head-up with some of the first quarter and the entire second quarter of the Super Bowl, did a 3.36 rating and 4.9 share, an incredible performance against the highest-rated television show of the year, which shows the loyalty of the WWF audience. In years past, when WCW would air its old Sunday night show opposite the Super Bowl, it usually drew ratings ranging from 1.1 to 1.4, or roughly half of the usual rating during whatever year it was on in, and in the final few years of its run TBS would program Andy Griffith marathons against the Super Bowl instead. Mankind and Rock spent almost no time in the ring, rolling around the arena. It was another example of Mankind taking movie stunt man-like bumps, and Rock doing little but keeping the pace up and talking trash. Vince McMahon did the commentary, and believed, correctly so, that much of the audience would be curious channel switchers who weren't familiar with the WWF and the two men, and commentated along those lines. Still, there is a reason movie fight scenes are usually limited to about 2 minutes, because this match got redundant and the commentary was too preachy and condescending about what the WWF is trying to portray itself as and who the characters are. At one point Mankind rolled down 40 rows of seats. At one point when Rock drank a Jack Daniels, McMahon claimed that it wasn't real liquor as The Rock doesn't drink, amazing from a company attempting to portray itself as the badasses. It ended up backstage with the food, with the guys selling for shots with razor-sharp popcorn, and reminded me of that short-lived early 90s TV show with Jesse Ventura where contestants got in food fights with each other. Finally they ended up in the back of the building and Mankind dropped a forklift with beer kegs onto Rock's chest, with the cameras not showing the obvious lack of impact, and Mankind jumped on top for the pin and his second title reign. The February 1st Raw was the 14th win in a row for WWF, and by a sizable margin, despite the quality of the two shows perhaps going in WCW's favor. Raw did another near-record 5.72 rating, 5.56 first hour, 5.86 seconds hour, and a 8.5 share to Nitro's 4.66 rating, 5.55 first hour, 4.27 seconds hour, 4.20 third hour, and a 6.8 share. Over the head-to-head 2 hours and 5 minutes, Raw's margin of edge was almost a point and a half, with Nitro doing a 4.24 rating opposite Raw. It was never close, with Raw winning all 8 quarters, scoring 6.0 quarters for, of all things, The Brood vs. Midian, Dennis Knight, and Viscera, Nelson Frazier Jr., and again for the follow-up Mankind/Rock interview confrontation, and for the last several minutes of the Triple H vs. Kane cage match main event. Raw had no weak periods. Nitro built around the same lines as Raw with more out-of-the-ring vignettes and arguably overexposure of the top guys in the same vignettes, but with longer and better quality matches but involving far less marketable names head-to-head, surprisingly stiff and strong bouts with the likes of Billy Kidman vs. Lash LaRue and Bam Bam Bigelow vs. the man without a name formerly known as Sandman, and even a stiff encounter with Scott Norton vs. Ernest Miller, all of which lasted more than 6 minutes, was never competitive, peaking with a 4.8 rating for the Scott Steiner and Buff Bagwell interview segment and the beginning of the Steiner vs. Jericho match, with a low point coming with a 3.7 for the segment with Diamond Dallas Page confronting the NWO in the locker room. A long NWO vignette ending with Page beating up on Disco Inferno in the ring. In main event comparisons, Triple H vs. Kane did a 5.7 final quarter and 6.0 overrun, while Benoit vs. Hall, a better match. However, Benoit is not yet ready for the TV main event spot in a single, and certainly not with Hall, did a 4.0 and 3.9 respectively. Champions roll call for 1998. Real names in parenthesis when using stage names. Numbers in parenthesis indicates multiple reigns with the same championship. For any historical dispute, we use the wrestling title histories by Royal Duncan and Gary Will and our own research and records as the prime reference materials. World Wrestling Federation. WWF Heavyweight. Shawn Michaels' third reign, Michael Hickenbottom, defeated Bret Hart on November 9, 1997, in Montreal, Quebec. Note: promotion double-crossed Hart in the ring on the finish since he was leaving 1 month later for WCW. Steve Williams, defeated Shawn Michaels on March 29, 1998, in Boston, Massachusetts. Glenn Jacobs, defeated Steve Austin on June 28, 1998, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Steve Austin's second reign, defeated Kane on June 29, 1998, in Cleveland, Ohio. Title declared vacant when Austin was pinned simultaneously by Undertaker Mark Calloway and Kane on September 27, 1998, in Hamilton, Ontario. The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, defeated Mankind, Michael Foley, in the tournament final on November 15, 1998, in St. Louis, Missouri. Mankind, Michael Foley, defeated The Rock on December 29, 1998, in Worcester, Massachusetts. Intercontinental Heavyweight. The Rock, second reign, Dwayne Johnson, was awarded the title on December 8, 1997, in Portland, Maine. Note: Austin was scheduled to lose to The Rock on December 7, 1997, in Springfield, Massachusetts, but refused. A compromise was worked out where he would vacate the title on television the next day. Hunter Hearst Helmsley, second reign, Paul Levesque, defeated The Rock on August 30, 1998, in New York. Helmsley vacated the title due to a knee injury. Ken Shamrock defeated X-Pac, Sean Waltman, in the tournament final on October 12, 1998, in Uniondale, New York. World Wrestling Federation Tag Team. Billy Gunn, Monty Sopp, and Jesse James, Brian James, defeated Legion of Doom, Michael Hagstrand and Joe Laurinaitis, on November 24, 1997, in Fayetteville, North Carolina. Title declared vacant after Cactus Jack, Michael Foley, and Terry Funk defeated Billy Gunn and Jesse James on March 29, 1998, in Boston, Massachusetts, in a dumpster match. The finish was contested due to the use of an unofficial dumpster. Billy Gunn and Jesse James, second reign, defeated Cactus Jack and Terry Funk on March 30, 1998, in Albany, New York. Mankind, Michael Foley, Kane, Glenn Jacobs, defeated Billy Gunn and Jesse James on July 13, 1998, in East Rutherford, New Jersey. Steve Williams, and Undertaker Mark Calloway, defeated Mankind and Kane on July 26, 1998, in Fresno, California. Kane and Mankind, second reign, won the title in a four-way match over Austin and Undertaker, The Rock and D'Lo Brown, and Billy Gunn and Jesse James on August 10, 1998, in Omaha, Nebraska. Billy Gunn and Jesse James, third reign, defeated Mankind in a handicap match when Kane refused to team with Mankind on August 30, 1998, in New York. Ken Shamrock and Big Boss Man, Ray Traylor, defeated Billy Gunn and Jesse James on December 14, 1998, in Tacoma, Washington. European Heavyweight. Hunter Hearst Helmsley, Paul Levesque, defeated Shawn Michaels, Michael Hickenbottom, on December 11, 1997, in Lowell, Massachusetts, in a mock match when Michaels refused to drop the title to Owen Hart. Owen Hart defeated Goldust, Dustin Runnels, on January 20, 1998, in Davis, California. Goldust pretended to be Helmsley, and it was ruled a title change. Hunter Hearst Helmsley, second reign, defeated Owen Hart on March 16, 1998, in Phoenix, Arizona. D'Lo Brown, A.C. Connor, defeated Hunter Hearst Helmsley on July 14, 1998, in Binghamton, New York. X-Pac, Sean Waltman defeated D'Lo Brown on September 15, 1998, in Sacramento, California. D'Lo Brown's second reign defeated X-Pac on September 29, 1998, in East Lansing, Michigan. X-Pac, second reign, defeated D'Lo Brown on November 18, 1998, in Chicago. World Wrestling Federation Light Heavyweight. Takamichi Inoku, Takao Yoshida, defeated Brian Lawler, in the tournament final to become the first champion on December 7, 1997, in Springfield, Massachusetts. Christian, J. Resso, defeated Takamichi Inoku on November 18, 1998, in Chicago. Dwayne Gill, who also wrestled as Gillberg as champion, defeated Christian on November 17, 1998, in Columbus, Ohio. World Championship Wrestling WCW Heavyweight. Title held up after Sting Steve Borden versus Hollywood Hogan Terry Bollea, match on December 29, 1997, in Baltimore, Maryland. Sting, fifth reign, defeated Hollywood Hogan on February 22, 1998, in San Francisco, California. Randy Savage, third reign, Randy Poffo, defeated Sting on April 19, 1998, in Denver, Colorado. Hollywood Hogan, fourth reign, defeated Randy Savage on April 20, 1998, in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Bill Goldberg defeated Hollywood Hogan on July 6, 1998, in Atlanta, Georgia. Kevin Nash defeated Bill Goldberg on December 28, 1998, in Washington, D.C. WCW Tag Team. Rick and Scott Steiner, fifth reign, Robert and Scott Reach Steiner, defeated Scott Hall and Sean Waltman, subbing for injured Kevin Nash, on October 13, 1997, in Tampa, Florida. Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, second reign, defeated Rick and Scott Steiner on January 12, 1998, in Jacksonville, Florida. Rick and Scott Steiner, sixth reign, defeated Scott Hall and Kevin Nash on February 9, 1998, in El Paso, Texas. Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, third reign, defeated Rick and Scott Steiner on February 22, 1998, in San Francisco, California. The Giant Paul White and Sting Steve Borden defeated Scott Hall and Kevin Nash on May 17, 1998, in Worcester, Massachusetts. The Giant and Sting split as a team. Sting defeated the Giant on June 14, 1998, in Baltimore, Maryland, to win both belts and chose Kevin Nash as his partner. The Giant and Scott Hall defeated Sting and Kevin Nash on July 20, 1998, in Salt Lake City, Utah. Rick Steiner and Marcus Bagwell defeated the Giant and Scott Hall on October 25, 1998, in Las Vegas, Nevada. Rick Steiner won against both men after Bagwell walked out during the match. United States Heavyweight. Diamond Dallas Page Falkenberg, defeated Curt Hennig on December 28, 1997, in Washington, D.C. Raven Scott Levy, defeated Diamond Dallas Page on April 19, 1998, in Denver, Colorado. Bill Goldberg defeated Raven on April 20, 1998, in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Goldberg vacated the title upon winning the WCW Heavyweight title on July 6, 1998. Bret Hart defeated Diamond Dallas Page in a number 1 contenders match to capture the title on July 20, 1998, in Salt Lake City, Utah. Lex Luger, fifth reign, Larry Fole, defeated Bret Hart on August 10, 1998, in Rapid City, South Dakota. Bret Hart, second reign, defeated Lex Luger on August 13, 1998, in Fargo, North Dakota. Diamond Dallas Page, second reign, defeated Bret Hart on October 26, 1998, in Phoenix, Arizona. Bret Hart, third reign, defeated Diamond Dallas Page on November 30, 1998, in Chattanooga, Tennessee. WCW Television. Booker Huffman defeated Disco Inferno, Glenn Gilberti, on December 29, 1997, in Baltimore, Maryland. Rick Martel, Richard Vigneault, defeated Booker T on February 16, 1998, in Tampa, Florida. Booker T, second reign, defeated Rick Martel on February 22, 1998, in San Francisco, California. Chris Benoit defeated Booker T on April 30, 1998, in Augusta, Georgia. Booker T, third reign, defeated Chris Benoit on May 1, 1998, in Greenville, South Carolina. Chris Benoit, second reign, defeated Booker T on May 2, 1998, in North Charleston, South Carolina. Booker T. 4th reign, defeated Chris Benoit on May 3, 1998, in Savannah, Georgia. David Finlay defeated Booker T on May 4, 1998, in Indianapolis, Indiana. Booker T. 5th reign, defeated David Finlay on June 14, 1998, in Baltimore, Maryland. Booker T underwent knee surgery. Stevie Ray Lane Huffman defended the title in the interim. Chris Jericho, Christopher Irvine, defeated Stevie Ray on August 10, 1998, in Rapid City, South Dakota. Conan Charles Ashenoff defeated Chris Jericho on November 30, 1998, in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Scott Steiner, 2nd reign, Scott Reach Steiner, defeated Conan on December 28, 1998, in Baltimore, Maryland. WCW Cruiserweight. Ultimo Dragon, 2nd reign, Yoshihiro Osai, defeated Eddie Guerrero on December 29, 1997, in Baltimore, Maryland. Juventud Guerrera and Nibal Gonzalez defeated Ultimo Dragon on January 8, 1998, in Daytona Beach, Florida. Rey Mysterio Jr. 3rd reign, Oscar Gutierrez, defeated Juventud Guerrera on January 15, 1998, in Lakeland, Florida. Chris Jericho 3rd reign, Christopher Irvine, defeated Rey Mysterio Jr. on January 24, 1998, in Dayton, Ohio. Dean Malenko 4th reign, Dean Simon, defeated Chris Jericho on May 17, 1998, in Worcester, Massachusetts. Malenko vacated the title. Chris Jericho 4th reign, defeated Dean Malenko via disqualification on June 14, 1998, in Baltimore, Maryland, to win the vacant title. Juventud Guerrera 2nd reign, defeated Chris Jericho on August 8, 1998, in Sturgis, South Dakota. Billy Kidman Pete Gruner defeated Juventud Guerrera on September 14, 1998, in Greenville, South Carolina. Juventud Guerrera 3rd reign, defeated Billy Kidman on November 16, 1998, in Wichita, Kansas. Billy Kidman 2nd reign defeated Juventud Guerrera on November 22, 1998, in Auburn Hills, Michigan. All Japan Pro Wrestling Championship history. Triple Crown title, PWF Heavyweight, United National, and NWA International belts. Mitsuharu Misawa 3rd reign, won the title from Kenta Kobashi on January 20, 1997, in Osaka. Toshiaki Kawada 2nd reign, claimed the title from Mitsuharu Misawa on May 1, 1998, in Tokyo. Kenta Kobashi 2nd reign, regained the title from Toshiaki Kawada on June 12, 1998, in Tokyo. Mitsuharu Misawa 4th reign, recaptured the title from Kenta Kobashi on October 31, 1998, in Tokyo. Double Tag Team title, NWA International and PWF Tag Team. Kenta Kobashi and Johnny Ace, John Laurinaitis, defeated Steve Williams and Gary Albright on October 4, 1997, in Nagoya. Toshiaki Kawada and Akira Taue, 5th reign, overcame Kenta Kobashi and Johnny Ace on January 25, 1998, in Yokohama. PWF Junior Heavyweight title. Monokia Mossman triumphed over Yoshinari Ogawa on August 22, 1997, in Tokyo. Title vacated, Mossman vacated the title to move up to the heavyweight division. Yoshinari Ogawa, 3rd reign, won the title in a tournament final against Satoru Asako on July 19, 1998, in Niigata. All Asian Tag Team title. Jun Akiyama and Takao Mori captured the vacant titles from Bobby Fulton, James Hines and Tommy Rogers, Thomas Couch, on January 29, 1995, in Tokyo. Johnny Smith, John Hindley and Wolf Hockfield, Jim Roche, defeated Takao Mori and Jun Akiyama on January 9, 1998, in Kagoshima. Jun Izumida, Ryukaku Izumida, and Tomoe Honda overcame Johnny Smith and Wolf Hockfield on October 6, 1998, in Niigata. New Japan Pro Wrestling Championship history. International Wrestling Grand Prix IWGP Heavyweight title. Kensuke Sasaki defeated Shinya Hashimoto on August 31, 1997, in Yokohama. Tatsumi Fujinami, 5th reign, claimed the title from Kensuke Sasaki on April 4, 1998, in Tokyo. Masahiro Chono overcame Tatsumi Fujinami on August 8, 1998, in Osaka. Title vacated, Masahiro Chono vacated the title due to a neck injury. Scott Norton won the title in an elimination match against Yuji Nagata on September 23, 1998, in Yokohama. IWGP Tag Team title. Masahiro Chono and Keiji Muto, 2nd reign, defeated Kensuke Sasaki and Kazuo Yamazaki on October 19, 1997, in Kobe. Title vacated. Chono and Muto vacated the title due to Muto's knee injury. Masahiro Chono and Hiroyoshi Tenzan, third reign, defeated Genichiro Tenryu and Shiro Koshinaka, date and location not specified. Genichiro Tenryu and Shiro Koshinaka overcame Masahiro Chono and Hiroyoshi Tenzan on July 15, 1998, in Sapporo. IWGP Junior Heavyweight title. Shinjiro Otani triumphed over El Samurai Osamu Matsuda on August 10, 1997, in Nagoya. Jushin Liger, 9th reign, claimed the title from Shinjiro Otani on February 7, 1998, in Sapporo. IWGP Junior Heavyweight Tag Team title. Tatsuhito Takaiwa and Shinjiro Otani became the first champions by defeating Dr. Wagner Jr. Manuel Gonzalez and Koji Kanemoto in the tournament finals on August 8, 1998, in Osaka. Extreme Championship Wrestling, ECW Championship History. ECW Heavyweight title. Shane Douglas, 3rd reign, defeated Bam Bam Bigelow Scott Bigelow November 30, 1997, in Monaco, Pennsylvania. ECW Tag Team title. Chris Candido, and Lance Storm Lance Evers won the titles in a three-way dance over Axel Rotten, Ryan Knighton, and Balls Mahoney, James Reschner, and Doug Furness and Phil LaFon on December 6, 1997, in Philadelphia. Rob Van Dam, Robert Shatkovsky and Sabu, Terry Brunk, defeated Chris Candido and Lance Storm on June 27, 1998, in Philadelphia. Dudley's 4th reign, Mark LaMonica and Devin Hughes defeated Rob Van Dam and Sabu on October 24, 1998, in Cleveland, Ohio. Masato Tanaka and Balls Mahoney overcame the Dudleys on November 1, 1998, in New Orleans, Louisiana. Dudley's 5th reign defeated Masato Tanaka and Balls Mahoney on November 6, 1998, in Queens, New York. Rob Van Dam and Sabu, 2nd reign, triumphed over the Dudleys on December 12, 1998, in Tokyo. ECW Television TV title. Taz, Pete Sinrika, captured the title from Shane Douglas, Troy Martin, on June 7, 1997, in Philadelphia. Bam Bam Bigelow Scott Bigelow defeated Taz on March 1, 1998, in Asbury Park, New Jersey. Rob Van Dam Robert Shatkovsky claimed the title from Bam Bam Bigelow on April 4, 1998, in Buffalo, New York. Ultimate Fighting Championships UFC Championship History. UFC Heavyweight title. Randy Couture defeated Maurice Smith on December 21, 1997, in Yokohama. Title stripped. Randy Couture was stripped of the title after his management team and Semaphore Entertainment Group failed to agree on financial terms for future matches. UFC Middleweight title. Frank Shamrock defeated Kevin Jackson on December 21, 1997, in Yokohama to become the first UFC middleweight champion. UFC Lightweight title. Pat Miletic triumphed over Mikey Burnett on October 16, 1998, in Sao Paulo, Brazil, to become the first UFC lightweight champion. Frontier Martial Arts Wrestling Championship History. Independent World Heavyweight and World Brass Knucks title. Masato Tanaka defeated the Gladiator, Mike Alfonso on September 28, 1997, in Kawasaki. Mr. Ganasuke claimed the title from Masato Tanaka on January 6, 1998, in Tokyo. Hayabusa Eiji Izaki overcame Mr. Ganasuke on April 30, 1998, in Yokohama. Hiromichi Fuyuki triumphed over Hayabusa on November 20, 1998, in Yokohama. World Brass Knucks Tag Team title. Wing Kanemura, Yukihiro Kanemura, and Mr. Ganasuke defeated Hayabusa, Eiji Izaki, and Masato Tanaka for the vacant titles on November 28, 1997, in Tokyo. Hiromichi Fuyuki and Hideo Takayama overcame Mr. Ganasuke and Yukihiro Kanemura on March 29, 1998, in Sanyo. Hayabusa and Masato Tanaka defeated Hideo and Hiromichi Fuyuki on April 17, 1998, in Sapporo. Hiromichi Fuyuki and Yukihiro Kanemura, 2nd reign, triumphed over Hayabusa and Masato Tanaka on May 27, 1998, in Hakata. Hayabusa and Daisuke Ikeda overcame Hiromichi Fuyuki and Yukihiro Kanemura on October 26, 1998, in Chiba. 6-man street fight titles. Hayabusa, Eiji Izaki, Masato Tanaka and Hisakatsu Oya, Kenichi Oya, defeated Atsushi Onita, Tetsuhiro Kuroda and Hideo Takayama, on December 20, 1997, in Osaka. Mr. Ganasuke, Yukihiro Kanemura and Jado, Shoji Akiyoshi, claimed the titles from Hayabusa, Masato Tanaka and Hisakatsu Oya on January 16, 1998, in Yokkaichi. Atsushi Onita, Koji Nakagawa and Tetsuhiro Kuroda overcame Mr. Ganasuke, Yukihiro Kanemura and Jado on February 13, 1998, in Chiba. Hiramichi Fuyuki, Yukihiro Kanemura and Haido defeated Atsushi Onita, Koji Nakagawa and Tetsuhiro Kuroda on May 5, 1998, in Wakayama. Titles vacated. The titles were vacated later in 1998. Hiramichi Fuyuki, Koji Nakagawa and Yukihiro Kanemura won the vacant titles against Hayabusa, Daisuke Ikeda and Riki Fuji, Masanori Morimura on June 28, 1998, in Hashoye. Rings Championship History. Rings World Heavyweight Title. Kiyoshi Tamura defeated Ilyukhin Mikhail in the tournament final to become the first champion on January 25, 1998, in Tokyo. Bisade Teriel claimed the title from Kiyoshi Tamura on May 29, 1998, in Sapporo. Under 209-pound championship. Masayuki Naruse triumphed over Christopher Haseman in the tournament final to become the first champion on August 13, 1997, in Kagoshima. Pancrase Championship History. King of Pancrase Championship. Masakatsu Funaki second reign defeated Yuki Kondo on December 20, 1997, in Yokohama. Guy Mesger claimed the title from Masakatsu Funaki on April 26, 1998, also in Yokohama. Wrestle Association Art, WAR, Championship History. J1 Heavyweight Title. Genichiro Tenryu Genichiro Shimade defeated Nobutaka Araya in the tournament final to become the first champion on January 14, 1998, in Tokyo. International Junior Heavyweight Title. Yujiyasu Ryoka triumphed over Jushin Liger, Keiichi Yamada, on June 6, 1997, in Tokyo. International Junior Heavyweight Tag Team Title. Masakazu Fukuda and Hiroyoshi Katsubo defeated Yujiyasu Ryoka and Tomohiro Ishii in the tournament final on November 24, 1997, in Yokohama. Titles vacated. The titles were vacated at a later date. Shinjiro Otani and Tatsuhiro Takaiwa won the vacant titles against Masao Orihara and Masaaki Mochizuki on December 11, 1998, in Komazawa. War 6-Man Championship. Koji Kiao, Nobukazu Hirai and Masaaki Mochizuki defeated Lance Storm, Lance Evers, Nobutaka Araya and Koki Kitahara, Tatsumi Kitahara, on October 27, 1997, in Isazaki. Titles vacated. The titles were vacated following Koji Kiao's retirement. All Japan Women's Pro Wrestling Championship History. WWWA Championship. Yumiko Hara defeated Kyoko Inoue on August 20, 1997, in Tokyo after Inoue decided to leave the promotion. Shinobu Kondori claimed the title from Yumiko Hara on March 21, 1998, in Tokyo. WWWA Tag Team Title. Saps INT Kaoru Ito and Tomoko Watanabe defeated Takako Inoue and Kumiko Makawa to win the vacant titles on April 21, 1998, in Tokyo. All Pacific Title. Tomoko Watanabe defeated Kaoru Ito on August 22, 1997, in Osaka to win the vacant title. Takako Inoue, third reign, claimed the title from Tomoko Watanabe on January 4, 1998, in Tokyo. Zappai Kaoru Ito overcame Takako Inoue on April 21, 1998, in Osaka. Kumiko Makawa defeated Zappai on May 5, 1998, in Tokyo. Yasha Kurenai won the title from Kumiko Makawa on November 19, 1998, in Yokohama. All Japan Championship. Momoe Nakanishi defeated Sachi Nishibori to win the vacant title on December 12, 1997, in Chiba. Emi Motokawa claimed the title from Momoe Nakanishi in February 1998 in Hamamatsu. Momoe Nakanishi, second reign, regained the title from Emi Motokawa in April 1998 in Tokyo. Japan Women's Pro Championship History. JWP Championship. Hikari Fukuoka defeated Dynamite Kansai, Shieko Suzuki, on April 8, 1997, in Tokyo. JWP Tag Team Title. Devil Masami, Masami Yoshida, and Hikari Fukuoka defeated Dynamite Kansai, Chieko Suzuki, and Kari Suzuki Yumi Suzuki, on November 26, 1996 in Tokyo. Manami Toyota and Kaoru Ito overcame Devil Masami and Hikari Fukuoka on January 23, 1998, in Tokyo. Hikari Fukuoka and Tomoko Kuzumi claimed the titles from Manami Toyota and Kaoru Ito on February 11, 1998, in Tokyo. JD Championship History. TWF Championship. Jaguar Yokota Toshimi Yokota defeated Lioness Asuka Tomoko Kitamura on October 22, 1997, in Tokyo. Lioness Asuka, third reign, claimed the title from Jaguar Yokota in January 1998 in Tokyo. Kyoko Inoue overcame Lioness Asuka on April 26, 1998, in Tokyo. Lioness Asuka, fourth reign, regained the title from Kyoko Inoue on May 6, 1998, in Tokyo. Kyoko Inoue, second reign, won the title from Lioness Asuka on October 21, 1998, in Tokyo. Japanese Television Rundown. December 26, JD. This was the Together Women's All-Star show from the Ariake Coliseum for the retirement of Jaguar Yokota. The show was somewhat typical of the Japanese women's scene. The wrestling was by and large good. The crowd was disappointing and there was very little heat. None of the younger wrestlers were over, even though many of them are good. 1. Shark Tsuchiya pinned Yuko Kosugi in 12:10 after a lariat. Tsuchiya pulled out this large ugly knife and carved up Kosugi's forehead. It was pretty gross. Kosugi came back with a lot of nice moves before the finish. It was decent. 2 stars. 2. Sugar Sato and Sonoko Kato of Gia beat Bloody and Fung Suzuki of JD in 14:51. Sato was tied up in the ropes by Ryura of JD, so it was like a handicap match. They mainly killed Kato, including Bloody giving her one German suplex after another. No heat at all. Sato finally escaped from being tied up and made the hot tag. Kato wound up pinning Suzuki after a German suplex. 1 star. 3. In an all-Asian match, Asia Kong and Mariko Yoshida beat Ayako Hamada and Mika Akino in 12:24. Hamada is great for only a few months in. She's very good under any standard. Yoshida has turned into a very good mat worker, doing a lot of good movement into submissions. Match was well done, but the crowd wasn't into it. Kong was almost never in. Yoshida finally made Akino submit to an armbar. 2.5 stars. 4. Tiger Dream and Shaparita Asari beat Sumi Sakai and Hiromi Yagi in 14:29. Sakai, who did a moonsault from the top rope to the floor, looked good. Actually, this was a real good match, but little heat. Asari did her sky twister off the top rope to the floor. Tiger pinned Sakai with a tiger suplex. 5. Devil Masami pinned Yokota in 1933 of her retirement match. It was really too bad because they wanted to put on a classic match. Yokota was still good in that she did everything smoothly and did nice moves, almost doing a cross between solid 70s work with some 90s moves mixed in, but did nothing that would be spectacular by today's standards. Yokota has gotten thin to the point of being almost frail, looking for a wrestler. Masami has gone in the other direction. She's huge and, unfortunately, immobile, since she's probably done more matches than any woman wrestler in history, and it shows as she's got no knees and comes off almost as a relic legend in the ring. It's funny because when they used to team and wrestle each other in the early 80s, Masami was bigger and stronger, but it wasn't as if one was twice the size of the other. Biggest spot was Devil standing on the middle rope and press slamming Yokota overhead and throwing her outside the ring. Masami scored the pin with a near press slam dropped into a tombstone piledriver, which was a cool looking finish. Masami and Yokota were crying in each other's arms after the match was over. Masami was crying uncontrollably while Yokota made her retirement speech. The fans applauded politely, but as retirement ceremonies go, the crowd reaction was subdued. For the most part, Yokota was someone whose work was always several levels above her crowd appeal. 2 stars. 6. Lioness Asuka pinned Mayumi Ozaki with her own Tequila Sunrise, half Nelson German suplex, in 7:10. Timing was off and this match wasn't good at all. Asuka is solid, but Ozaki seemed out of her league. 1 star. 7. Kyoko Inoue and Atsuko Mita and Mima Shimoda beat Takako Inoue and Manami Toyota and Yumiko Hata in 1926. This was Neo Ladies vs All Japan Women and was a really good match and was the only match on the show that had good heat. It was an old-style AJW match with women that know how to do it. This was a step slow on everyone's part compared to their heydays. This match would have been great 3 years ago and off the charts 5 years ago if they were put in this position on a big show, but even today it was a great women's main event. Toyota was better than the rest, but can barely make it to the top rope for her famed springboard plancha. A lot of good near falls and saves with everyone doing their big spots. Finish saw Kyoko Inoue use the torture rack dropped into a powerbomb that Kenta Kobashi made famous a few months back. It was called an Argentinian backbreaker bomb. 4 stars. January 17th, All Japan. 1. Vader beat Kobashi in 1659 in their first ever singles meeting. As you can imagine, they both had their working shoes on and it was a slow starter that built into an excellent match that more than lived up to its expectations. Kobashi mainly worked on Vader's knee, while Vader would cut him off by popping him in the face. Vader did a high powerbomb on the floor and dented a chair badly on Kobashi's head. Kobashi at this point was spitting blood out of his mouth, which was bleeding badly. Kobashi used a pescado out of the ring and a few suplexes in for near falls. He did a weak missile dropkick, didn't get good height, and the crowd was down, but the missed spot didn't faze him and he went back to work and the crowd was back into it. Kobashi missed a moonsault. Vader's work in this match reminded me of Stan Hansen in his last year as a serious headliner in that he had enough left and enough credibility to have great matches, but you can also see he's not what he was. Kobashi got a good near fall with a moonsault. Vader came back with stiff punches to the face and a moonsault, but Kobashi kicked out. Vader used a high German suplex and 2 Vader bombs, but Kobashi kicked out again, before Vader finally got the pin after a splash off the middle ropes. 4.25 stars. Mexico. With the Rey Mysterio Jr. mask loss in the US upcoming, a mask versus mask match between Mysterio Jr. versus Psicosis was set up for Tijuana sometime this month. On January 29th, before 3,900 fans in the finals of an 8-man tournament for the David Trophy, Mysterio Jr., who had beaten Damian and Venom Black, pinned Psicosis, who had beaten Villano V and Halloween, in a good match with the crowd actually slightly favoring Psicosis. The finish saw Rey Mysterio attempt to hit Rey Jr. with a chair, but instead hit Psicosis, leading to the pin. Rey Jr. then challenged Rey Sr. and Psicosis to a 3-way match with the loser losing his hair or mask, but Rey Sr. declined and Psicosis accepted. Also on the show in the main event, Conan and Elio Del Santo and La Parca, the most popular wrestler on the show, beat Villano Tercero and Black Magic, Norman Smiley, and Silver King in straight falls, since the match didn't even start until midnight, and Liz Mark Sr. and Atlantis beat Fuerza and Juventud Guerrera via DQ. PAPSA announced its Reina de Reinas show will take place February 19th in Puebla, but no lineup was announced. After Astro Rey Jr. had scored 6 consecutive clean wins in trios matches over Archangel, they held the Mexican national welterweight title match on January 31st at Arena Coliseo with Archangel winning clean with a superpower bomb off the top. Mano Negra Sr. showed up bald on January 31st at Arena Coliseo, having lost his hair on January 24th in Panama City, Panama to a local wrestler named Celestial. Mexican wrestling legends Huracan Ramirez, Blue Demon, Karloff Lagarde, Cavernario Galindo and Rey Mendoza are all going to appear in an in-ring ceremony on February 5th for the Legend of Santos show at Arena Coliseo. PAPSA runs Tijuana on February 5th with Latin Lover and Canek and La Parca Jr. vs. Cibernetico and Sangre Chicana and La Gacela as the main event. The CMLL television show in Mexico is being cut from 2 hours to 90 minutes, which would then almost surely be the case for the Galavision show as well. Reports are the big EMLL show of the week on January 29th at Arena Coliseo was as weak as it sounded, with Los Hermanos Dinamita beating Tinieblas Jr. and Mr. Niebla and Shocker on top. However, crowds continue strong as it was nearly a sellout again. The show on January 26th was the first of the past 17 shows at the building, since December 18th, to draw less than 4,000 fans. Espectro Jr. captured the Mexican national middleweight title from Abismo Negro on January 27th in Ecatepec and defends it on February 5th in Cuautitlan against Pero Aguayo Jr. Also on the show in a women's hair match, La Briosa beat La Nazi. A novel is being released based on the life of wrestler Canek. All Japan. Of course, there has been no news here since the death of Baba. Before he died, they set up Akira Taue vs. Vader for the vacant Triple Crown on March 6 at Budokan Hall. The way it was done was that Toshiaki Kawada said that he was vacating the title but wanted Taue, his regular partner, to face Vader, who had earned the shot with his win over Kenta Kobashi on January 15. This gives a logical reason to avoid putting Kobashi or Misawa in the match and apparently will allow Vader to go over and set up Misawa vs. Vader for the title at the Tokyo Dome. With Misawa in charge, one thing everyone is looking at is to see if he'll be more willing to work with other companies, and if he'll have the resources to spend more money. As mentioned in the Baba article, All Japan used to be the place to wrestle because it was a great money circuit, but now with business so strong in the US and New Japan and Baba maintaining his financial structure, it has fallen way behind the other groups, and with the exception of Misawa, Kawada, Vader, Hansen, and Kobashi, isn't really that much better than ECW. WWF was looking at opening up a relationship including sending talent to the Dome show, but hadn't started negotiations because of Baba's condition. The weekly Pro Wrestling Readers Awards in the February 9th issue gave Kobashi the MVP award for Japan, followed by Misawa, Shinobu Kandori, Keiji Muto, Alexander Otsuka, Masahiro Chono, Hiromichi Fuyuki, Jushin Liger, Jun Akiyama, and Yuki Ishikawa. All Japan also won Singles Match of the Year Misawa vs. Kobashi on October 31st, which captured 2,057 votes as compared to 278 for Tatsumi Fujinami vs. Kensuke Sasaki in second, and All Japan Dome matches from May 1st with Misawa vs. Kawada and Akiyama vs. Hiroshi Hashi finished 3-4. Akiyama vs. Yoshinari Ogawa placed 5th and Kawada vs. Kobashi on June 12 placed 8th. Tag Team Match of the Year, Vader and Hansen losing in the tournament finals to Kobashi and Akiyama on December 5th, which doubled second place Chono and Hiroyoshi Tenzan vs. Shiro Koshinaka and Genichiro Tenryu on June 5th. Best Foreign Wrestler Vader, finishing ahead of, in order, Norton, Stan Hansen, Dr. Wagner Jr. and Johnny Ace and Card of the Year, with the May 1st Dome finishing with double the votes of New Japan's April 4th Inoki retirement show. Not only that, Yoshinari Ogawa's Figure 4 Jackknife Pin was named Move of the Year with more than double the votes of Kendo Kashin's Flying Armbar. For New Wave Wrestler, which is a Rising Star award, Otsuka won, followed by Ogawa, Ayako Hamada, Yuji Nagata, Kengo Watanabe, Satoshi Kojima, Kobashi, Akiyama, Naohiro Hoshikawa, and Tetsuhiro Kuroda. Other awards were August 23rd Kandori vs. Manami Toyota as Women's Match of the Year and November 29th Jaguar Yokota and Devil Masami and Lioness Asuka vs. Asia Kong and Dynamite Kansai and Yumiko Hata as Women's Tag Match of the Year. Next show is February 13th at Korakuen Hall, which is basically Fan Appreciation Day, and will have a one-night trios tournament with Misawa and Ogawa and Masahito Kakihara, Kobashi and Akiyama and Kentaro Shiga, Taue and Masafuchi and Masao Inoue and Hiroshi Hashi and Takao Mori and Yoshihiro Takayama, plus a return All-Asian Tag Team title match with Tamon Honda and Jun Izumida defending against Hayabusa and Jinsei Shinzaki. January 24th TV show Misawa vs. Kawada did a 5.4 rating. New Japan. With both Shinya Hashimoto and Masahiro Chono out, the current tour is drawing poorly and has little in the way of interest. In fact, tickets for the February 14th Budokan Hall show aren't selling, and to spice up sales, it was leaked that Atsushi Onita will do a run-in appearance. The tour opened with a less than full house, 3,500, at the Tokyo Yoyogi Gym 2 with the first round of the IWGP Title Challenge tournament, and it not selling out was a big surprise and not a good one. Satoshi Kojima beat Kazuo Yamazaki in 12:14 with an armbar submission. Manabu Nakanishi beat Tadao Yasuda in 8:41 with a torture rack submission. Hiroyoshi Tenzan pinned Shiro Koshinaka in 10:46 with a diving headbutt, and Kensuke Sasaki pinned Yuji Nagata in 14:16 with a Northern Lights bomb. Sasaki vs. Tenzan and Kojima vs. Nakanishi will be the semifinals on February 11th in Osaka. Also on the show, the junior heavy tag champs Dr. Wagner Jr. and Kendo Kashin beat Tatsuhito Takaiwa and Koji Kanemoto in 14:51 when Kashin used the armbar on Takaiwa, and Shinjiro Atani pinned Jushin Liger in 1948 with his spinning spider bomb. Akitoshi Saito was released from his contract. Masakazu Fukuda, who is a good worker based on what I've seen, who wrestled with Wrestle Dream Factory, which may be closing up, was signed and debuted on January 28. Brian Johnston is working as a regular pro wrestler on the undercard every night on this tour. Oleg Toktarov starts with UFO on the March 12th show. January 23rd TV show did a 3.0 rating. Other Japan notes. Ultimo Dragon's debut Toryuman show was a big success, drawing a sellout 2,131 fans to Korakuen Hall with a six-man headliner of Dragon Kid and Saito, and Magnum Tokyo beating Judo Suwa and Shima Nobunaga and Sumo Fuji in an elimination match which lasted 45:04 before Tokyo pinned Nobunaga with a shooting star press. Nobunaga was the star of the show, which was said to have been great. Dragon announced that his group would be working with Michinoku Pro in the future, which is pretty well the savior of the MPW office. Rings February 21st at Yokohama Arena. Besides Akira Maeda vs Alexander Karelin has Volkan vs Nikolai Zverev, Andrei Kobelov vs Yoshihisa Yamamoto, Wataru Sakata vs Sean Alvarez, Ricardo Morris vs Hiromitsu Kanehara, and Kiyoshi Tamura vs Valentin Overeem. The latest on Maeda Karelin is that Maeda's side wants it to be 2 5-minute rounds under rings rules. Maeda is currently in Seattle training mainly under Tsuyoshi Kosaka. It is believed that Kosaka will beat Bitsade Terrell later this year to capture the heavyweight title. Those involved in training Maeda are saying they are being told it will be a shoot match. Of course we won't know until they get in the ring, and if it is, will be a first for Maeda. Maeda's training has been really hard with the cardio, light on the wrestling/submissions and almost no kickboxing. Karelin was at ringside for the January 23rd show, but as it turned out, arrived after the prelim matches, which were apparently shoots from what I'm told, although I won't see the tape until this week, and only saw the worked matches. Frank Shamrock was also at the show in Kosaka's corner for the Tamura match. That match was said to be a 4-stars match. Although no contract has been signed, it appears at this point that Shamrock vs Tamura will take place possibly in April, but more than likely will take place this year. Here and there. Jacques Rougeau Jr. held a press conference this past week to announce he's restarting his independent promotion in Quebec with the first show on February 14th at the Pierre Charbonneau Centre in Montreal. Rougeau said that he was putting $42,000 of his own money into the show and is planning on running 4 shows and hopes to go throughout Quebec, but wasn't committing to the idea, and it appears Paul Leduc will be involved. His first show will be headlined by his teaming with Brother Raymond against Greg Valentine and Abdullah the Butcher for the Johnny Rougeau tag team titles. Jacques has made belts with the image of his uncle on them. Johnny Rougeau was the promoter in Montreal in the 60s and early 70s during a heyday period. Raymond, 43, who is long since retired from the ring but still under contract to WWF as a French-language announcer, said he was only going to do this one show, teaming with his brother for the first time in many years, claiming so his 8-year-old son, who had never seen him wrestle, would get a chance. Also at the press conference was Michelle Dubois, better known as Hayward, California resident Alexis Smirnoff, who will also be helping with the promotion. Among those on the card will include King Kong Bundy, Kevin Martel, nephew of Rick, and Carl Leduc, son of Paul, best known as the bald-headed dude being stretched by Stu Hart in the Bret Hart movie Baldo. Matt Bloom captured the first Power Pro Wrestling title on January 29th in Memphis, beating Jerry Lawler due to interference from Sean Stasiak. The TV show on January 30th was built around Lawler vs. Stasiak, with Lawler putting Stacy up for 2 weeks. Lawler refused the challenge, but Stacy accepted. Bet you can see where this one is going, because she knew Lawler would win. Bruce Pritchard from the WWF was at the studio and helped host the show with Dave Brown, which I guess meant it was a day for all the talent to try and impress. Aaron O'Grady beat Vic Grimes, but Grimes put him through a table after the match. With the WWF pay-per-view show on February 14th at the Pyramid in Memphis, and long since sold out, WWF will be in town and some talent will be working the PPW House show on February 12th in Memphis, and the TV the next morning, including draws Hawk, Giants, Silva, Jim Cornette, Pritchard and Michael Hayes. Doak Hendricks, who is actually only 39 years old but probably nobody believes it, and after watching some tapes of him this past week made me realize if that Michael Hayes was around today with his charisma and speaking ability, he'd be one of the 6 biggest stars in the game. Baldo kept his title, beating Ricky Morton when Morton's wife Andrea threw in the towel after 2 press slams into power bombs. Pritchard, who wound up arguing with Hales throughout the show, ended up jumped by the Syndicate, Grimes, Baldo and Stasiak, and Pritchard vowed to bring WWF talent in 2 weeks to get revenge. In the main event, Stasiak beat Lawler when Baldo hit Lawler with a chain. Baldo cut big gaps in Lawler's hair. Wonder if it'll be noticeable this week on Raw. While Stacy cried, and Stasiak carried Stacy off with him. Inside Edition will be doing a wrestling segment on February 23rd. They interviewed Bruce Mitchell and Chris Cruz over the weekend at the New Dimension show and have also interviewed Missy Hyatt, who is doing some training to be a wrestler at Johnny Rod's school in Brooklyn. The second episode of Roller Jam fell to a 1.1 rating on the first airing on January 22nd and in 0.5 for the replay on January 23rd, drops from 1.7 and 0.9 respectively. To say this drop isn't a good sign is an understatement, and from a financial standpoint, are almost disastrous. It's too bad, because the game started to show improvement on January 29th. There are still plans to start touring in May. They clearly made a mistake in rolling the product out before it was ready, and in using almost entirely new skaters and the lack of camera readiness of the skaters when it came to interviews. The current issue of Details has a story written on a guy trying out for roller jam in Southern California. It's nothing you should go out of the way to read unless you are looking for photos of Elizabeth Hurley. Cover the Patriot Del Wilkes appeared on an indie show on January 23 in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Patriot has put on some weight since being released by the WWF after suffering a tear of his chronically injured tricep. Yokozuna was in a full-page ad in the January 18 Internet World magazine for Sumo Incorporated. Forgotten but never gone department. Former Memphis manager Ernest Angel is now based in Akron, Ohio doing the religious ministry's gimmick using the name Ernest Angley. Angel got a lot of heat for interfering in matches by hitting the faces over the head with the Bible. Actually, he was quite entertaining, but was a few years ahead of his time. Got a copy of the April 1, 1957 issue of Sports Illustrated with the Danny Hodge cover. SI was 25 cents in those days and the difference in price was every bit as much as the difference in writing quality as compared with today. In the story they asked Hodge about going into pro wrestling, where he became the dominant junior heavyweight in the world for virtually his entire career, and he said, "Not for me. I want to be a teacher." Carlos Colon and Abdullah the Butcher teamed up again on January 30 in Guaynabo, Puerto Rico to beat Ray Gonzalez and Victor via DQ in the main event. They teased a spot where Gonzalez threw powder in Butcher's eyes and he thought it was Colon, but Butcher's manager El Vikingo told him what happened and they made up again. Now that Butcher is a face, he dances in the ring with fans after the matches. Michael Tierson will be starting a weekly column in the Philadelphia Daily News on February 16. There have been reports circulating about the movie Hittin' the Mat being a biography of Mick Foley. That isn't the case, as it's a documentary being put together by Barry Blaustein, Nutty Professor, and Foley probably will get as much airtime out of the documentary as anyone, but it is on the entire wrestling industry. It appears Foley, Terry Funk and Jake Roberts may be among the most prominent in the finished product. Steve Stogdale at 540-886-1855 is being forced to sell his wrestling collection, which dates back a long time with a lot of very hard-to-come-by items. MMA. As everything stands right now, the planned lineup, and none of these matches are signed, for the March 5 pay-per-view are Vitor Belfort vs. Guy Mesger, with the winner of the match possibly facing Frank Shamrock for the middleweight title on May 7 in Sao Paulo, Brazil, Tank Abbott vs. Gary Goodridge, Maurice Smith vs. Marcus Conan Silveira, Jason Godse vs. Pete Williams, and prelim matches involving Evan Tanner and Sion Latu. On paper it's one of the weakest lineups in a while. It appears Smith-Silveira may be, if Smith wins, to set up Smith vs. Boss Rutten as the main event on the May 7th show to create a heavyweight champion, because Pedro Rizzo isn't going to fight Rutten. If nothing else, Smith vs. Rutten is interesting because both may want to keep the fight on their feet. Latu is actually a pro wrestler from the Carolinas who has worked for years as a jobber under the name John Savage, and is the younger brother of the Barbarian of WCW. I only know of him fighting once, which was a rings match where he lost quickly to Tsuyoshi Kosakai in a shoot. He's got a good look and seemed to be an exciting fighter with potential, but is very inexperienced at this, and that Kosakai seemed like a chess master playing with a novice in their match, and at 30 years old to be getting into this with the sport having evolved as far as it has. It is official that there will be no show in April, but on April 2nd there will be a taped show called Ultimate Ken Shamrock, showing tapes of Shamrock's various UFC fights. Problem is, all this will be is expose just how far the game has advanced. Shamrock's return to UFC, if it could be put together, would be huge due to the amazing popularity these days of WWF, but I don't see any pay-per-view interest in seeing his fights from years ago, all of which have long since been released on video. If they could do a documentary on the life of Shamrock and Lion's Den training and show clips of his and his other fighters' matches, that would at least be more interesting. Japan Direct TV has inked a deal to air UFC pay-per-view shows live on June 18th and December 17th, the latter date at this point scheduled for Japan, using Kosaka as the TV announcer. The only possible fight for Japan that could be a solid draw if UFC were to return is a Rutten vs. Kosaka rematch. ECW. Terry Funk should be ready in a few more weeks. Pretty quiet weekend with shows on January 28th in Revere, Massachusetts before a sellout 1,100, January 29th in Worcester, Massachusetts before 1,300, and January 30th in Fall River, Massachusetts before a sellout 1,200. Sid was really over and got the biggest reaction of the weekend. Super Crazy vs. Yoshihiro Tajiri continues to be the best match nearly every night. Weekend TV saw Taz do an interview running down Rock and Hogan. He claimed Rock was a green guy who got a push because someone liked his look. He then asked if anyone thought Hogan could beat him. He probably couldn't, But what does that have to do with pro wrestling today? He then said he was real, he was a shooter, and challenged everyone in the world. They replayed clips of the Taz Douglas match from Philadelphia. The crowd reaction at the finish was a setup spot, as Taz after the match started clapping, signaling for the crowd to turn Douglas, and he facially reacted. Nothing wrong with it, as just about everything in wrestling isn't spontaneous. After the Taz interview, the next 20 minutes of the show were filled with replays from last week and some really tacky TV commercials. The only match that aired was Sabu and Rob Van Dam over Axel Rotten and Balls Mahoney, which was good, particularly considering how limited Rotten is as far as taking bumps due to his health problems. Several psychotic dives by Sabu and Van Dam. Sabu won with an Arabian facebuster to the back of the head. Think about that description. Sabu needs to change the name of that move. Rest of the show was the build-up for the return of Public Enemy. Joel Gertner was hilarious. Even Bubba Ray Dudley was real funny doing a Johnny Grunge imitation. The role of Joey Styles was so overplayed throughout the skit. WCW. At this point, the February 21st Oakland pay-per-view is Hogan vs. Flair for the WWF title, Goldberg vs. Bigelow, Hart vs. Hall for the U.S. title, Steiner vs. DDP for the TV title, Conan and Mysterio Jr. vs. Nash and Luger with Mysterio Jr.'s mask against Elizabeth's hair, and Disco Inferno vs. Booker T announced. Not announced yet, but pretty well planned. It is Benoit and Malenko vs. Wyndham and Hennig, which will be the finals of the tag tourney, and probably Billy Kidman vs. Chavo Guerrero Jr. for the Cruiserweight title. Nitro on February 1st at the Target Center in Minneapolis drew a sellout 17,259, which was 16,018, paying $380,941. The show opened with the angle where Kimberly was injured so she can get her cosmetic surgery. Do you ever have a dream where you wake up in the middle of the night and all the women in the world have faces that look like these Cher-looking alien beings? Not a pretty thought. At least she fell down and bumped her head, and didn't do that very believably, as opposed to them doing an angle where Steiner beats her up. Conan and Mysterio Jr. challenged Nash and Luger to a match. The way this was set up was totally retarded, which I'll get to on the retort. They did the first of a zillion videos of the NWO guys trying to get over as being cool. Well, Steiner, Bagwell, Nash and Hall get to be cool, and the other guys are like the poor kids in high school who try to be cool and aren't. And Flair ordered Bischoff to stand in a dunk tank for the next 3 hours, while all the WCW people who hate him, and that was a long line, got to throw softballs to knock him in. Luckily for Bischoff, nobody who hates him has much of an arm, and these segments were dying of embarrassment as guys kept missing the target with pitch after pitch on live TV. Tape this stuff with margin of error ahead of time next time. Oh yeah, about 25 minutes in, we got a wrestling match, and a good one, with Hennig and Wyndham beating Benoit and Malenko in 12:53 when Hennig pinned Benoit after a fisherman suplex. I know that finish sounds retarded, and by the end of the show, it was, except Benoit and Malenko are scheduled to win the tag tournament and be the champs, and are supposed to beat Hennig and Wyndham in the finals, so it does make sense. The uncool, pissed-off NWO guys found a bunch of lost women in their dressing room. We have no idea what happened next, because the next time we saw them, they were with the rest of the guys and there were no women. Except Steiner was holding a Nitro Girls outfit coming from the bathroom, but he was fully clothed. Flair did an interview. He called Vincent Virgil. Hope McDevitt doesn't hear about that one. He announced Benoit, who had just gotten pinned, was the top contender for the U.S. title and would face Hart at Super Brawl. Hall and Disco came out and began insulting Flair. Benoit came out and he and Flair cleaned house, which wound up with Benoit versus Hall for the title shot as the main event, and unfortunately, the ratings tell the story on that one. At 9 p.m. with Raw starting, they trot out Kenny Chaos versus Van Hammer, Hammer by Power Slam 229. Sandman, who was never identified by the announcers. I think they were told that they couldn't call him Sandman. They couldn't call him Jim Fullington. They couldn't mention ECW or Raven videos. Couldn't explain what the hell Sandman was talking about to the 95% of the audience that had no idea. Came out with a cane and wrapped in barbed wire, but without cigs and with a new physique. Some people in the crowd knew him and most didn't. Luckily for him, he did a good interview talking about being extreme, at least to those who do know. I can't imagine what anyone else was thinking. Poor Mike Tenay, he had to come up with a line as they were pounding on each other that perhaps these two have crossed paths before. Poor Shivani, having to call a match without mentioning the name of the participant. You know how lame it makes him look, and he doesn't need help on that account. Somewhere in here Tenay mentioned that Baba had died, which showed some class. I've got this revolutionary idea that will change the game. Let the announcer talk to the audience like if they were doing any other sports or entertainment show. The con man approach makes it difficult to get angles over in the first place, and who cares if they mention they are talking about ECW on TV? It's there. If the guys can bring it up in their hazy, vague way on interviews that never connect the dots, why can't the announcers connect the dots and translate it into English for the audience at home? What's the crime in saying that, even though it's against every bylaw of the industry today? Because they are dumb bylaws. Why not say he used to be the Sandman and we haven't come up with a name for him yet? It sounds stupid, but why can't WCW make fun of itself? The bookers have been doing it for years. Anyway, they had a better match than they had any right having, with Sandman's offense consisting of almost only cane shots before Bigelow came back, hit him with a hard chair shot, threw him into barbed wire. They traded moves on a chair and Bigelow gave him the greetings on a chair in 6-11. Some cameraman was trying to dunk Bischoff. Then Scott Dickinson was trying to dunk him. Kidman was then stooging off to Page what Steiner did and how his wife got hurt. How come these stars just don't arrive on time? Page barged into the NWO locker room. They didn't seem to care. Steiner wasn't there because he was in the bathroom holding the outfit of a Nitro girl, and I don't want to think about what he was doing. They told Vince, to tell DDP that Steiner will fight him at Super Brawl and to slap around DDP. Vince then told Disco that when he slaps him, everyone is going to jump DDP. Disco went in like an idiot singing Song Blue by Neil Diamond, slapped him, and got banged. You know, Diamond Cutter. It's not like Page was having sex with him or anything. That would be on the other channel. Nash was telling Vince how smart he was. Page then drove off. Kidman beat Lash LaRue to keep the Cruiserweight title with a shooting star press in 7:56. I've got two schools of thought about this one. It was a really good match, but nobody knows LaRue, who showed a ton of potential as a worker. Everyone has to start somewhere, but starting with an 8-minute match, even though it was good, in this competitive an environment isn't going to help ratings. If the idea to screw the ratings for 6 months, we're going to develop new talent and angles, and since wrestling is so hot now, this is the time to do it. That's good long-term thinking. I just don't know if the company is thinking long-term. Hogan and Chuck Zito, one-time Hell's Angels leader best known for coing Jean-Claude Van Damme at a New York strip club, were in a limo acting like they were really cool headed to Charlotte to beat up David Flair. Steiner and Buff did their interview. Steiner was, in his own words, mesmerizing. Steiner beat Jericho in 8:56 with the recliner. Jericho tried to leave, probably to get a better spot online for the dunk tank, when Saturn came out, wearing a new dress and wearing makeup, and threw him back in to get pinned. Do you ever wonder what happens to Steiner's urine specimens? They probably come back with, "This isn't a member of the human species." They aired a tape from the February 6th episode of Mad TV, "Thank God I don't have to stay home Saturday night and watch it now," of Bret Hart hitting John Sasso with a chair and putting him in the Scorpion. Luger and Nash and Liz did the interview accepting the challenge. Okay, here goes. This angle is totally ass backwards. Babyfaces should look courageous, perhaps in jeopardy, but with the guts to fight against the odds. Heels should be assholes. But not in WCW. In WCW, babyfaces are absolute pitiful numbskulls and the heels are the coolest guys around. Great, they got an absolute miracle 2 weeks ago because Mysterio Jr. is so talented he actually got a good match out of Luger. The odds of it happening again aren't that good. So Little Ray puts up his mask in a match where Nash is on the other team. That's not courageous, that's totally stupid. Nobody thinks he has a prayer. And that stuff where Ray was talking about how Luger and Nash showed him so much love in WCW, there's behind the scenes and there's storyline. I always thought TV was storyline. The only interaction Ray and Nash have ever had was when Nash threw him into the trailer like a dart, and when they had that ridiculous singles match a few years back, which was the last time Mysterio Jr. looked like a complete idiot. Luger and Nash laughed about it, basically making it look like Conan and Mysterio Jr. were job guys, and then put Liz's hair up. And after a split second of thinking, she laughed about it too. This angle only makes sense if Ray pins one of the big guys, but since the plan is for him to lose, how can you have sympathy for a guy that's stupid, and how can you dislike the other team that laughs about the match and then wins at the end anyway? Miller challenged anyone. Norton was asleep or something, so the NWO told him Miller called him out. Norton hit the ring and looked mad. Well, he always does. When Miller saw Norton, he wanted to back out, but they had the match and Norton basically made Miller look bad by not selling his stuff. Actually, it was stiff as hell, to the point that Miller's skin was getting peeled off his chest, and was better than it had any right to be before Norton bombed him in 6:10. Goldberg was interviewed challenging Bigelow for Super Brawl. Finally, Hall beat Benoit in 11:08 with the edge when Benoit was distracted by Nash. It was a good match. But imagine how stupid Flair and the Horsemen look when Benoit loses twice on the same show. Hart did color and didn't have much to say. Show ended up Hogan and Zito finding David Flair going to the gym in Charlotte, and Flair was watching the monitor and the show went off the air. Guess we've got to tune in Thursday to find out if David beat the hell out of both of them. As if. Rick Martel was at Nitro on January 25th interviewing about a position as a French-language TV announcer. Eddie Guerrero must be in rough shape as he was supposed to help backstage at the proposed WCW Latino taping on January 27th in Waco, Texas, but his doctor wouldn't allow him to fly. Superboy, Blitzkrieg, Felino and Mosco de la Merced all got tryouts in Minneapolis. Blitzkrieg, who has the least experience of the group, may be getting a deal. Felino was told specifically by Paco Alonso that if he showed up in Waco that he'd be fired, but he came to Waco anyway. Reportedly Alonso, who was at the WWF show in Phoenix on January 25th and may have signed a deal with WWF, told Felino that he was still in a negotiating with WCW. He'd insist as a condition of the deal that Felino be fired. There was a minor skirmish at the bar after the show between Miller and Kidman. Miller was behaving in a toned-down manner of his TV persona, bragging about how tough he is, which apparently isn't that unusual. Kidman must have said something because Miller threw a punch at him, but it was quickly broken up. February 26th at the Alamo Dome in San Antonio has Goldberg vs. Nash, Sting vs. Luger, Page vs. Hart, Flair and Benoit and Malenko vs. Wyndham and Hennigan Steiner, Conan vs. Hall, Ray vs. Juvie vs. Kidman triangle match, Chavo Jr. and Silver King and Hector Garza vs. Psicosis and Parka and Smiley in a prelim or two. Nash and Page spoke at a meeting before Nitro. Nash said that he didn't want people coming in late because they are going to start pre-taping features before the show, and was adamant about saying that everyone has to do jobs. He basically said, as is obvious, that they are going to do more skits and pre-taped segments on Nitro a la Raw. DDP was on Regis and Kathy Lee on January 26th. Heard it wasn't good. DDP seemed nervous and was trying to get over the Diamond Cutter as this finisher. Ray Lloyd, the former Glacier, was a plant in the audience trying out his new gimmick as a high school PE coach with a whistle, you know, that lame John Tolos WWF gimmick, and challenged him. Of course Page banged him and Regis covered him and Page counted 3. Crowd didn't pop for the cutter even though Page spent his interview trying to pre-program for the one spot. NBC Dateline was scheduled to do a wrestling piece on January 27th, but it didn't air. We haven't heard about it being rescheduled. Lisa on February 9th or February 10th will have Conan, Page, and Sting. Jenny Jones on February 10th or February 11th will tape, not sure of air date, with Jimmy Hart, Bagwell, and Disco. Jimmy Hart A&E bio story is a little bit farther than it really is. A&E hasn't decided to do it, but Hart is pitching the idea to them for it. Goldberg was offered a guest shot on ER, but WCW nixed it because the filming would conflict with a Monday Nitro. Some heat over that since they don't book Goldberg a lot of Mondays anyway, and now they won't give him off when he has a chance to be seen to more people than have ever seen him before. We don't have a lot of notes on the Waco taping other than it was considered a fiasco in taping, but may wind up being a good television show when it airs on February 24th. The company invested big money just on the set and the open. The show began with Disco, Jericho and Johnny Swinger wearing sombreros and making racial remarks to heat the crowd. Problem was the crowd was 70% Anglo. They started stomping the sombreros and called the crowd wetbacks. The WCW production staff freaked, thinking you can't put that kind of racial stuff on television. They don't even use that language in the WWF, and it went downhill from there. Superboy, a Los Angeles indie wrestler, and Kendo, a wrestler from Mexico, actually were the best workers on the card. Silver King, who was doing a cowboy gimmick, had been learning rope tricks and apparently trying them in the ring, somehow wound up by accident nearly tying himself up with his own rope. I swear they should put that on Nitro because at least he could get over as a comedy figure. Jimmy Hart was managing the Puerto Rican group of David Sierra and Ricky Santana, and they didn't look good. Prognosis clearly isn't good for this one, although we're told the work in some of the matches were good. The Hart movie aired as the Film Alternative Film Festival in Park City, Utah, and was introduced by Carl Lewis. Reports that Rath has signed a new deal are incorrect, but he does feel it's inevitable that he's going to stay. Bagwell was scheduled to start back in the ring over the weekend on the California shows, but it didn't happen. Guess with Sandman on Nitro in his old role and no reference to the Raven videos means that idea has been scrapped. Apparently there were people who didn't like the videos. Wouldn't you think they should have previewed them ahead of time and come to that decision rather than airing 3 or 4 and then abruptly stopping referring to them? Shows this week saw January 27th in Waco, Texas drew 2,433 paying $45,126 for the Latino taping. January 29th in San Diego drew 5,133 paying $168,334 and January 30th at the Forum in Los Angeles drew a sellout 14,994 paying $287,151. California shows were said to have been very good, with the first half better than the second half. Best matches both nights 3 ways with Juvie, Ray and Kidman for the title. Goldberg beating Nash headlined both nights. In San Diego, Wyndham actually beat Flair. The advertised tip was if Flair won, he'd get 5 minutes with Bischoff. Since Bischoff no-showed, they had no choice but to put Wyndham over. Bischoff was in LA, and Flair beat both Wyndham and then used the figure 4 on Bischoff. Flair got the biggest crowd reaction both nights with Goldberg second, although Nash had a lot of cheers in Los Angeles. Dennis Miller was at ringside in Los Angeles. There were reports of George Clooney being backstage as well. Bodybuilders Paul Dillett, Chris Cormier, Aaron Baker and Rico McClinton were also at the show and may have accompanied Conan to ringside for his match with Luger. Merchandise from January 21st to January 27th was $216,324 or $7.90 per head. Thunder on January 28th did a 4.2 rating and WCW Saturday Night on January 30th did a 2.5. The house shows on March 19th in Chicago, March 27th in Detroit and April 3rd in Boston are tentatively Hogan vs. Flair, Singh vs. Hart, Luger vs. Goldberg, Hall vs. Conan, Benoit and Malenko vs. Wyndham and Hennig, Kidman vs. Ray vs. Juvie and Sandman vs. Bigelow. For those wondering the whereabouts of Rick Rude, he did the backstage blast on February 1st in Minneapolis. Goldberg spoke on February 2nd before Congress about banning cockfighting and other animal fighting. He's big into animal rights legislation. Hart is getting serious about writing a book. Apparently the departure of Terry Taylor went something like this. Bischoff jumped Taylor about rumors he was going to WWF and told him if he wasn't happy in WCW to just leave. Taylor talked about being under pressure with his father having health problems and Bischoff offered him time off without pay. The next day he made the deal with McMahon. The women who accused Giant of exposing himself to her, although the legal charges were dropped by the Memphis police the next day, sued Giant and WCW for $500,000 last week. WWF. Preliminary reports indicate the Royal Rumble did a 1.57 buy rate, which would be a $6.95 million show. It would be the biggest Rumble as far as buys are concerned in history, and be in the same ballpark as SummerSlam and last year's WCW Bash at the Beach for the Rodman vs. Malone deal. So it's a huge success. So in following the policy that if the truth makes you look good, you have to lie anyway on TV this week, Michael Cole claimed the WWF had surpassed Mike Tyson as the leading draw on pay-per-view, strongly hinting as if the Rumble had broken Tyson's records. I don't know what math they are using, as the Tyson Holyfield records were a 6.0 buy rate and something like $50 million. Even the most recent Tyson Boda, which was considered a huge disappointment in the industry, still did a 1.88 buy rate and $12.6 million, which was less than half of what the last time Tyson made the comeback and the Peter McNeely fight did. Current plan for the February 14th pay-per-view from Memphis is Austin vs. McMahon in a cage match, Mankind vs. Rock for the WWF title, Last Man Standing, Helmsley and X-Pac vs. Kane and Chyna, Snow vs. Road Dogg. This will be the second match of the best 2 of 3 series for the hardcore title, so if Snow wins, it's only evened up. Shamrock vs. Venus for the IC title, Goldust vs. Blue Meanie, Jarrett and Hart defending the tag titles against Henry and D'Lo Brown, and probably one more match to be added. So there are several changes from last week, and who knows, there could be several more changes next week. Austin missed the weekend shows in Pittsburgh, Cleveland and Philadelphia due to having to deal with family issues, which apparently are for the large part taken care of. He's expected back this coming weekend. They posted signs in all the arenas and offered refunds. The cards were all restructured, although the current plan of attack in the WWF is to come up with cards, and then as they change ideas every week, change the cards after the last Raw taping using the latest ideas and trying to work them into a house show card that uses the updated feuds. With Austin out, they went with Mankind in 4 ways beating Undertaker, Rock and Bossman when Undertaker and Rock brawled to the back and Mankind pinned Bossman. The WWF has now sold out 29 of its past 31 house shows dating back to late November. The company is currently well ahead of any pace for the most successful year for a promotion in the history of the industry. The other end is the beginnings of the backlash to the methodology that has been at least to a degree responsible for this success. There has been nothing breaking over the past week in Winnipeg, however. Both TNT and USA Network held press conferences for TV critics from around the country on January 19th and January 20th respectively. Usually in these situations WWF seems to come out the better, but based on every article I've seen, this wasn't usual. McMahon came off poorly when he tried to claim that they didn't do a crucifixion, that they didn't do a castration, and their language isn't anything worse than anything else on primetime TV, and that when the middle finger stuff was brought up, he claimed not to know what that meant. He also ripped on WCW, saying that he hoped Ted Turner would go to hell. Bischoff, who was there the previous day with Sting and Goldberg, questioned the tactics WWF used to reach this level, saying he wouldn't stoop to that level of poor taste, and McMahon responded saying they can't compare to us. The only thing they can do is throw negatives and grenades. They're nasty people. I don't like them. Ted Turner can go to hell. I hope one day he does. Phil Rosenthal of the Chicago Sun-Times responded to McMahon's last two sentences in regards to Turner ending up in hell, saying that if he gets there, that point he'll be able to compete. Bischoff said, "Where I draw the line is stuff that's of a sexual nature, the homophobic type of things that are out there, things that are religious or racially based. Quite frankly, I think what our competition is doing isn't necessarily going to increase the pool of advertisers willing to spend their dollars in our industry." Diane Wirtz in Newsday, who said she was a wrestling fan, wrote a blistering anti-WWF column on January 28, saying this entertainment has taken a creepy turn of late. She called McMahon chillingly straight-faced and spiritually callous about the new direction of the company, saying that Springer knows he's a joke, admits he's a joke, celebrates he's a joke, and lets everybody in on it. But McMahon's operation is so stone-cold sober about its ugliness. Proclaims he, proudly, will attempt to reach out and grab any emotion we possibly can. You got mine, Vince. Revulsion. At this point, despite warnings from Bischoff to the contrary, WWF isn't hurting for advertisers. WWF got a lot of attention for the Super Bowl spot, with almost daily mentions in USA Today, and wouldn't you know it that there was a full-page ad in the same paper a few days later. According to the various stories, WWF claimed to have gotten its Super Bowl ad well below the $1.6 million per 30-second spot rate claimed in publicity. The stuntman, Mike Jones, who was shot out of the window of Titan Towers, suffered a sprained knee, and actually had done the stunt on a broken back suffered in a different stunt 3 weeks earlier. WWF printed a totally misleading graphic from the February 1st USA Today, indicating the commercial was a big hit and the highest-rated commercial. It had a heading that looked authentic, saying Best Newcomer, and spliced its commercial rating underneath it as if it finished highest among newcomers or something. Actually, it finished 29th out of 52 commercials in the ad meter voting, which is a whole lot higher than it finished where I was watching. I learned a valuable generation gap lesson. I watched it with a large group of people in their early 30s. I was the only one who even cared when the WWF commercial was on, and you have no idea how unpopular the idea was to switch to USA at halftime. Nobody cared about Sable after the Frito-Lay model and Victoria's Secret's commercial. Most shocking was more than half the people had never heard of Steve Austin or Vince McMahon. Whatever it was, just for the pub, this was all well worth the investment and then some. Raw on February 1st was taped January 26th in Tucson, Arizona, before a sellout 6,986, paying $175,544. They taped a few Super Astros matches, with El Merenguero teaming with Mini Torito, beating Negro Casas and Miguel Perez, and El Hijo del Santo and Armando Fernandez beat Aguila and Papi Chulo. Which sounds awfully difficult, as obviously they have a new wrestler as Aguila. The previous night on the Super Astros taping, they debuted a heel named El Bandito, who was Scorpio Jr. without the mask, beating Casas. Believe me, of all the wrestlers in Mexico, he's one that you don't want to unmask. Raw opened with Shane doing an interview explaining that Vince was in Victoria, Texas with Patterson and Briscoe hunting for Austin. They did skits throughout the show which weren't funny in the sense of Patterson and Briscoe looking like clowns, but they were getting old. Vince was trying to provoke Austin, but it didn't work, and it ended up with a gang of Texas thugs advancing on Patterson, McMahon and Austin in a bar. The cage lowered while Shane was doing an interview, and X-Pac was on the cage and he was pounding on Shane until Chyna gave him a low blow and held him for Shane. Billy Gunn went to a no contest with Val Venus when Ken Shamrock, at ringside doing commentary, hit Venus with a chair, but he thought Gunn was the one who hit him with the chair and clipped his ankle and hit him with a chair. Lawler and Shamrock were hilarious, with Lawler trying to provoke Shamrock to attack Venus. The original plan was for Gunn to win the IC title at the Rumble, but Gunn has been a problem of late, and it was felt going through with the change under those circumstances would send a bad message about the company condoning his behavior, so he instead had to do the ankle lock. He was supposed to be in a three-way on the February 14th show, but that was changed as well. But he's still in line for a major singles push, and they may be putting the three-way for the IC title at Mania. Kevin Kelly was interviewing Deborah's boobs when Henry tried to put the moves on her, and Jarrett and Hart beat him up while Deborah laughed at him. Bossman beat D'Lo Brown in 2:49 with a slam when PMS cost Brown the match. Terry Runnels still can't talk. Bossman was pounding Brown with a nightstick until Henry saved. Meanie came out dancing as one of the Raw Boys, a spoof on the Nitro Girls. Goldust attacked him and gave him shattered dreams. Dr. Francois told Brown that Runnels was never pregnant. He was shocked. I guess he never heard the commentary on the Capital Carnage pay-per-view. Hacksaw Jim Drozdov beat Kurgan, hitting him with a 2x4 in 1:52. Quick, what's the only thing lamer than Kurgan's offense? His selling. Brood beat Midian and Viscera in 2:06 when the Acolytes pounded them and they hung Gangrel until he was dead. Mankind was giving away Rock's money throughout the show. He rented Max Mini for his kid to play with from, I guess, Max's owner. If this doesn't make sense, it's because all foreigners in wrestling are semi-retarded naive children. And minis are also semi-retarded naive children. So Max Mini, being both, is either double or the square root or something like that. Mankind and Rock did an interview setting up their pay-per-view match. Acolytes beat Road Dogg and Snow in 6:40 of a brutal ECW-style brawl when Bradshaw powerbombed Dogg through a table. Dogg was injured and missed the next 3 days but was back on the road in limited form over the weekend. After the match, the Druids attacked Dogg, revealing them as the Brood. After all this, Dogg was mad at Snow for behind backstage and popped him twice with a chair. Finally, Triple H beat Kane in 12:15. It was boring in spots, but Triple H carried it to a decent level in others. X-Pac and Chyna were both involved in the finish. Triple H ended up kicking Chyna off the cage and getting out first to win. Kane's head was split open bad. Not sure if it was a chair shot or taking a bump, but he needed several staples to close the wound. Kane went on the road all week but couldn't wrestle, which wound up with house shows containing some lame skits and matches in place of scheduled Triple H vs. Kane bouts. Chyna issued a challenge for the mixed tag. She can't talk. The February 8th Raw in Toronto was at one point scheduled to be headlined Austin vs. Mankind for the WWF title, although it wasn't announced on Raw this week. Raw will only air on February 8th live in Canada. It airs on February 13th in the US due to the Dog Show, which gives Nitro a chance to pick up a huge audience. The latest WWF CD is up to number 24 on the charts with 54,370 sales over the past week. It appears it will be going up on the next charts. Foley received 7 or 8 stitches after the Rumble match. Dan Severn is on his way out. Severn was given a series of options. It was suggested that he do a shoot fight with Steve Blackman, which makes no sense in the confines of the WWF, which he didn't want to do because they were friends. He was given the option but signing a contract release where they would give him a severance check as a buyout. Or he could remain on contract for the next year plus until it expires, but he'd be jobbed out. As of right now, it appears he'll be working through the end of February. Severn didn't get over. It would have been tough, and if it could have worked, and there is no guarantee, it had to be done perfectly from the start, and it wasn't. He was pretty well doomed when he asked to wear the NWA belt on WWF TV again, because the first thing they did was injure him with Owen under the guise of making him a face and setting up a feud. Then before they could even do their feud, they turned him on Blackman for no reason. This isn't confirmed one way or another, but I've been led to believe Severn is booked with the WWF in early February, which would negate reports of a shoot fight in Holland this week. Severn put Blackman over at house shows all week. Jim Ross met with Tank Abbott in Los Angeles and Mark Kerr in Phoenix when the tour hit those cities. Nothing is signed. There was an article 2 weeks back on Butterbean in the Philadelphia Daily News about his WWF deal. It is said that he had a 2-fight deal with the WWF, true, for $50,000 per fight, maybe true, and claimed the contract stated that Butterbean wouldn't be pinned in either match. WWF has had discussions about doing a Butterbean vs. Bart Gunn Brawl for All match, but the schedule never made it possible, although Butterbean is going to take time off boxing after his fight on February 13th. Still, for Butterbean, it's a no-win situation doing a shoot in a pro wrestling ring, and his deal was for 2 worked matches, and he hasn't been interested in doing a Brawl for All match against Gunn. Because Butterbean's marketability is down from when the deal was made, he may just be paid off on his contract and not used a second time. Sable will probably be phased out of a wrestling capacity except for an occasional gimmick match. They'll probably push her hard for a Mania match to take advantage of the Playboy cover. NBC Weekend Today is doing a feature on Kurt Angle training for a WWF career. Dory Funk and Tom Pritchard are doing a camp this week with Steve Williams, Carl Ouellet, Pierre, who is said to have dropped 30 to 40 pounds and is in great shape, Luke Poy and Barry Buchanan, Truth Commission, Dennis Knight, Jose Estrada Jr., Steve Bradley, Paul Orndorff III, said to be Real Green, Glenn Kolka, Tom Howard, and Angle. Paul White will probably debut in the ring at Mania, although he'll probably have a presence felt on television leading up to the show. Super Astros is doing a 6.5 Hispanic national rating on Univision. House shows for the week saw January 27th in Colorado Springs drew a sellout 7,914, paying $152,377. January 28th in Wheeling, West Virginia draw a sellout 7,029, paying $140,570. January 29th in Youngstown, Ohio drew a sellout 6,386, paying $115,205. January 30th afternoon show in Cleveland drew a sellout 19,663, paying $354,182. Fourth straight sellout in Cleveland. January 30th evening in Pittsburgh drew a sellout 16,589, paying $298,233. Third straight sellout. And January 31st afternoon show before the Super Bowl in Philadelphia drew 16,417, paying $364,151. Merchandise for the week was $545,366 or $6.73 per. Midweek shows had Mankind over Rock on top. The weekend shows had the Four Ways. Jarrett and Hart won guitar matches over Road Dogg and X-Pac at the weekend shows when Chyna gave X-Pac a low blow. Triple H vs. Chyna or Triple H vs. Kane both ended quickly with outside interference from the other since Kane couldn't wrestle due to the staples in his head. Fans were chanting ripoff in Philadelphia after their non-match. Philadelphia show was reported as a rushed deal and pretty bad from several sources, which would be the exception to the general rule. Rock, Shamrock, Ernie Ladd and the Hardy Boys appear on February 7th on Fox's That 70s Show. At the Critics' Convention, Stephen Zhao of USA Network responded to criticism of WWF by saying the issue to me in very simple business terms is the show antisocial, and does it send a bad message? And I unequivocally have zero problems with the show. Austin, Mankind and Rock will be 3 of the 4 featured in another set of TV Guide covers slated for March 22nd. Newsday in its high school notes section mentioned the Mick Foley interview where he mentioned the names Jim McGonigal the week after winning the title the first time. McGonigal was Foley's wrestling coach in high school. Howard Stern even ripped on the Mark Henry Sammy skit on his show that week. He said it was ridiculous and shouldn't be allowed on a TV show that young children are going to watch. He was critical of the WWF as a whole and made fun of the WWF when reading an ad they took out for the Rumble. Weekend ratings saw Live Wire at 2.2 and Superstars at 2.3, both well above the usual. The readers' pages. I'm so confused. Instead of wrestlers always having to order the sound booth to cut the music, shouldn't the WWF and WCW simply hire technicians with better timing? Sonny Ono always seems to have plenty of money. Why doesn't he use some of it to buy a sports jacket that fits, so we won't have to pull the laughs to adjust it every 30 seconds? In EMLL or AAA, do the wrestlers pile drive each other through the English announcers table? Is Jose Lothario angry at Mick Foley for bumping him down to the number 2 spot for most famous sock in pro wrestling history? Do you agree that the best job in America is being a woman wrestler? After all, the same day you start, you're already among the 5 best. When record keepers credit Jerry Lawler with holding more than 100 championships, does that count the time when he put the gum under his toy karate fighter's feet to win the tournament? If the WWF employs a wrestler whose last name is Test, is it pretty safe to assume that his first name is not Steroid? Why do they make a big deal about Steve McMichael's one measly Super Bowl, when his ex-wife Deborah has 2 of them? And her Super Bowls are getting more and more super with every augmentation. Which high-ranking WWF official personally auditioned the male transvestites for the cameo role as the seducer of Mark Henry? Could answering that question shut you down for years? Will Hulk Hogan spend the next 8 years of his life obsessing about getting his win back from Jay Leno the way he did with Ultimate Warrior? Now that Kevin Nash vs. the Giant matches are nothing but a beautiful, beautiful memory, Does this mean we get to see 6 months of a heated Who's the True Giant feud between Giant and Giant Silva? How come Perry Saturn's dress shows off less nipple than Jacqueline's? Is it true that Kane got his name from the film Citizen Kane? I say there's no way. That was a moving picture. Mr. Fuji hasn't been around the sport of kings since around 1995. Is it true that he's now running a KFC franchise, where he recently won the Worst Manager award for the 4th straight year? Who was Pope the last time somebody sold one of NWO Vincent's punches? Am I correct in calculating that Roddy Piper has held the same number of championship belts during his entire WWF and WCW career as Judy Bagwell has in hers? When Vince McMahon wrestles Steve Austin in the cage match, will McMahon adhere to the time-honored traditions of the business that made him? If Kurgan ever fights in a ladder match, will be the 3rd most agile participant in the ring by default? My friend has a wrestling audio tape that's filled with agonizing shrieks of "Oh my God, no. No. I.e., the pain. Stop it. Stop it." But there's no label. Is this a secret recording from Stu Hart's dungeon? Or is it just the Nitro audience watching Scott Steiner do one of his 8-minute promos? If Lina Vachon got a job taking fast food orders through an electronic drive-through speaker, would her voice sound normal? Why do WCW announcers falsely report the entire NWO is in the house, when we haven't seen a single glimpse of the TBS dinner and a movie guys since the fateful night they turned NWO for life? According to the current US life expectancy charts for males, I should live another 40 or 50 years. Do you think I'll ever get to see one pro wrestling arm wrestling match end cleanly? Hawk fell off a 50-foot scaffold weeks ago, but I've yet to read his obituary in The Observer. Did he use the same doctor who performed the miracle when the Giant fell off the roof of the building? The advertisements for the WCW credit cards confuse me. Isn't having an all-plastic picture of the Nitro Girls kind of redundant? If Hulk Hogan can knock over and pin Kevin Nash with a gentle one-finger tap, how come Scott Hall has never beaten anyone with his devastating toothpick hurl? Why are people too enthused by Hitman Hart wrestling with shadows, or the upcoming Jesse Ventura movie? After all, Ken Shamrock has had twice as many movies inspired by his entire act Scream and Scream 2. Does Eric Bischoff plan to reveal the endings of pre-taped episodes of Ally McBeal and Everybody Loves Raymond episodes to really jack up those Nitro ratings? Desmond Devil. Truth or Consequences, New Mexico. Ratings. Looking at your ratings analysis, I find myself wondering if perhaps you're giving a bit too much credit where credit is due. Since my criticism involves my favorite wrestler, I better protect myself. As great as he is, not was, but is, Ric Flair has still achieved the status of sacred cow to many fans. And much like Wayne Gretzky getting the MVP award at the All-Star Game, I fear wrestling's great one may be getting honored more for sentiment than skill. Yes, he is a ratings phenom. Yes, he gains ratings points at a great clip. But it's not that astonishing when one considers the product he's surrounded by. When everything else WCW is doing is a loser, any positive interest is going to create a positive percentage. Rather than a one-loss record, it's more like the ERA for a closer on a bad team. His numbers are good, but his team still loses. As for your total yards analogy, I'd like to suggest it's because he missed so many games that his average looks good. He's not facing a defense. He's drawing viewers and fans. Fans pop for returns. Returning and leaving are all Flair's 1998 was about. His powerhouse percentage is the exact opposite of your Austin as a workhorse back theory. Flair's numbers are like the rushing average of a great wide receiver who gets 3 or 4 end-arounds a game. If he breaks 2 of them for a 20-yard gain once is likely, although doing 1 in every game does stretch credibility, but still, he could be a 1,000-yard rusher. Flair broke loose with some of the biggest gains of the season in this league. I'd like to break from a sports analogy to talk about one of my other all-time favorites, Arn Anderson. His numbers are not a testament to his mic work or his history. He's every bit as lucky as the boss man. He's there for the same reason. Right place, right time, next to the right person. There was no Arn Anderson angle. It's all about Flair. Reuniting the Horsemen? It's all about Flair. Do any of the other Horsemen have an angle? No, they're all about supporting Flair. And by now longer being a wrestler, Anderson's numbers are saved from having months of meaningless matches when Flair wasn't around. In a sense, Anderson has become Flair's Brutus Beefcake. As long as Flair is around, the sidekick will look good. Mind you, Anderson can look good on his own. But he's never on his own. The specter of Flair is always there and can be summoned whenever he raised 4 fingers in the air. To a lesser extent, I'd like to make the same suggestion for another older legend, Terry Funk. The coattails I feel he rode on in 1998 belong to Mick Foley. I'd be willing to bet that once he started teaming with Scorpio, his numbers faded back to earth. These three are legends with a capital L, deserving of the honors the numbers bestow on them. They also rank among my favorites of all time. But enlisting them as the outstanding TV draws of the year, methinks we doth protest too much. Drew Bernstein. Buffalo, New York. Response from Dave Meltzer: I'll suggest that if a wide receiver with minimal carries finished 11th in the league in total yards gained rushing, it would be considered a phenomenal achievement. As for Anderson, over the summer, his reuniting of the Horseman angle in interviews always drew big improvements in the ratings long before the deal was cooked to bring Flair back. Granted, whenever you see Anderson, the specter of Flair is always there, but there was also a period where WCW was airing clips of when Anderson beat Flair to try to show it was Anderson, not Flair, who was the key to the Horseman, since at the time Flair wasn't coming back. Granted, it only made people end up wanting to see Flair more, but that wasn't the intention, and Anderson did well on his own. No doubt Funk's numbers were helped by being aligned with Foley, and perhaps at the time there was a little vice versa as well. Women's wrestling. While being grateful for the fine article on the retirement of Jaguar Yokota, it is puzzling that since her comeback in 1994, and her own Yoshimoto Pro Wrestling Company being formed, none of her matches were ever covered in the newsletter to any great extent. The same lack of coverage of all the women's groups in Japan is equally puzzling right now, as there are some excellent matches going on and readily available on video. What is the reason that even a few matches per month can't be covered in more detail? Do we really need to waste space with Raw and Nitro what's hot and what's not? It's not even likely that the WWF Steve Austin High School Sheep Internet clique of America and Britain even care about this segment. They will be more interested in reading more about the next brainless skit on Raw. Small crowds are the order of the day for all of the women wrestlers in Japan. But wouldn't it be nice to be able to show off on television every week and pay-per-view every month, and have your last crappy match mentioned in a wrestling sheet? The wrestler of the decade is Manami Toyota. Emphasis on the word wrestler. To extol the reasons for this choice would result in the newsletter having to go an extra 2 pages. But to simply things, she has been an off-the-charts work year and year, and that equals best wrestler. I'm afraid I have problems with your listing people like Hart, Vader, and Austin. John Castles. Stockport, England. Response from Dave Meltzer: Right now the US is the dominant market for pro wrestling. It hasn't always been that way, and it probably won't be forever, as these things go in cycles everywhere. For better or for worse, the US business revolves around Monday night ratings, and as long as that's what decisions are being based on and what the most important thing is, that's the thing we have to look at closely to start spotting new trends, or even successful old trends. At this point in time, aside from the occasional major show, women's wrestling in Japan is largely at a minor league level, and while we cover the major angles and matches to an extent, there just isn't enough space to cover in detail every minor league level promotion. I do agree that Toyota should be high on the list of Wrestler of the Decade, and it was an omission leaving her off that list, but I'd be hard-pressed to pick her number one, because as great a performer as she was and still is, she was never really a draw, and this business revolves more around drawing money than producing great athletic performances, and a Wrestler of the Decade should be at the top in both. Mick Foley. I felt I needed to write because of the I Quit match at the Royal Rumble. This was the first time I've ever been disgusted watching wrestling. It was deplorable watching the finish. I thought wrestlers were supposed to protect each other, but this match was a total turnoff. More of this stuff and I will stop watching. It was totally unnecessary. Peter Leon. San Francisco, California.